It was late 2018, and life as I knew it was crumbling right beneath me. My parents, my husband, and I were driving to Indianapolis to visit family. This trip was meant to be a distraction, a chance to gather myself after learning that my husband had been involved in a months-long emotional affair with his unstable ex. I felt broken, betrayed, and absolutely alone. His ex had tried everything to wedge herself between us. Her manipulations pulling at the already strained edges of our marriage. And worst of all, it seemed to be working. I feared that I was losing him to her, and that fear consumed me. When we had stopped for the night, I told my husband I was going out for a cigarette, but in reality, I needed an escape, a moment to drown my emotions in something stronger than nicotine. I found myself at a nearby bar, sitting alone and ordering 2 double vodkas with just a splash of orange juice. The alcohol was a temporary calm to the storm raging inside of me, and I struck up a conversation with the bartender. She was kind, engaging, and for one fleeting moment, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. When the bar announced last call, and it was clear that I wasn't done drinking, the bartender suggested another spot nearby, at TGI Fridays. I stumbled out of the bar, already buzzed, but intent on chasing the numbness just a little bit longer. At TGI Fridays, I ordered another round, 2 more double vodkas, and by the time I stepped outside for that cigarette, the world around me was spinning. I leaned heavily against a light pole in the parking lot, the cool air biting at my skin. I don't remember how long I stood there for, but the haze in my mind began to clear, in the worst possible way. I was no longer leaning against the pole. Instead, I felt hands on me, pushing, guiding, forcing me into a car. Panic gripped me, but my limbs felt like lead. My head swam, and I couldn't make sense of what was happening. The man holding me was muttering something, his voice low and insistent, but there was no way that I could process his words. When suddenly, another voice pierced through the fog. It was my mother's. "That's my daughter. Let go of her," she screamed, her tone filled with a mix of fury and desperation. But the man didn't stop. He kept arguing, insisting that I wasn't her daughter, that I was with him. I could hear the anger in my mother's voice rising as she stood her ground. But I was too drunk, too weak, and too out of it to help her fight. It was surreal, this stranger trying to steal me away, while my mother fought tooth and nail to save me. The argument escalated, and my mom eventually threatened to call the police. That was when the man finally let go of me. He shoved me back, scrambled into his car, and sped off so fast that his passenger side door was left swinging open. I instantly crumpled to the ground, both disoriented and trembling with fear. My mom rushed to me, her face pale with fear, and my husband soon joined her. His expression, a mix of relief and anger. Later, they told me just how they'd found me. When I hadn't returned from my so-called cigarette break, my husband grew worried. They tracked my phone, which was in my purse, to the bar where I'd been. But by the time they arrived, I was no longer there. They followed the signal to the Fridays parking lot. That's where they found my phone discarded by some bushes, tossed almost like an afterthought. Now, if they hadn't tracked me when they did, I shudder to think what might have happened. The police were called, but by then, the man was long gone. I was barely coherent, my words slurring as I tried to explain what little I could remember. My mom, realizing how drunk I was, insisted that I needed medical attention. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital bed, my wrists restrained to prevent me from hurting myself while in my intoxicated state. The humiliation I felt was overwhelming. My head pounded, my throat burned, and I was covered in bruises. Large, dark marks on my arm where the man had gripped me, and an even larger one on my chest that I couldn't explain. The details of that night remain broken up in pieces in my mind. I feel a deep sense of guilt for putting myself in such a vulnerable position. But I also struggle with the terror of knowing how close I came to disappearing entirely. while that man's intentions are still murky to me, I know that I narrowly escaped something far worse than I can comprehend. In the months that followed, my husband and I worked through our issues. It wasn't easy, but we rebuilt the trust that had been shattered. He stood by me as I processed the trauma of that night, and in some strange way, it brought us closer. But still, this memory follows me like a shadow, a constant nod to just how quickly things can spiral out of control. That night could have ended very differently, and I'll never take my safety for granted ever again. It was autumn of 2015. I was 23 years old, and during that time, I lived in Lancaster as I was studying at Lancaster University. For those who may not be familiar, Lancaster is a small and rather quaint town in the north of England. As a student, you could either live at the university campus or in private accommodation in the town. I had decided to live in a newly renovated apartment on the nice side of town. And yes, it was expensive. I had already been studying for 2 years and had reached my 3rd year. By this time, I had grown accustomed to the layout of the town and felt comfortable and safe living there semi-independently. Keep in mind that I roomed with 2 other friends who were also studying at the university. Since my 1st year, I had decided to improve my fitness by taking nightly runs around either the campus or the town. As we were living in the town center by my 3rd year, I would run either with my housemates or alone. The important thing to note about Lancaster, and this will be important later, is that it has quite a large residential area that's hilly and far removed from the bustling center, which at that time was a hub for the students or the local northern folk, probably out drinking in pubs or off eating pies. Occasionally, I would run with my housemate, but I always preferred to run alone and listen to some kind of heavy metal. I was a big fan of Deftones during that period. On this particular evening, I had decided to run by myself. It was around 8 p.m., and I had my earphones in. I had started to run up the more isolated district that led up to a very pretty residential area in this large green called Williamson Park. Next to the park was a very large graveyard, the kind that's miles wide and had different sections to it. Large yew trees, crumbling graves, a crypt in the center, overrun with leaves and ivy. What was especially creepy about this particular cemetery was that it even had the ruin of an old mental asylum or some sort of hospital on the other side. You could actually sneak in if you walked across the width of the cemetery and crawled through a small hole in the fence that led to the asylum grounds. This wasn't particularly advised though, as guard dogs roamed the derelict building. It wasn't exactly a place you wanted to be during the night. So I had made my way past Williamson Park and up to the entrance of the graveyard. Immediately, my eye was drawn to something small standing at the imposing gates of the graveyard. I felt a little apprehensive, but it wasn't exactly unusual to see people walking their dogs either in the graveyard or around it. So I just slowed my pace to a walk in the direction of the shape. But as I drew nearer, I realized that the shape was a child, no more than 9 or 10 years old, and they were now running towards me frantically. They looked terrified and panicked. I think they were even crying. I vividly remember that this little girl wasn't wearing a coat, only a thin dress that wasn't quite suitable for the harsh Lancastrian autumn. She asked me if I could help her. She was desperate and seemed to be frightened of something. She kept looking back into the graveyard, which at this point was totally pitch black beyond the gates. I mean, there was absolutely no light beyond the path. As the graveyard was so large, it was actually a bit unsettling to see the depth of blackness and this vulnerable child standing at the mouth of the gate, helpless. I don't recall what the girl said exactly, but I offered to call the police. I typed 999 into my phone and had it on loudspeaker. But that's when the girl immediately changed. She wasn't happy about the fact that I was calling the cops. That much was clear. She had stopped crying, and now she seemed angry, almost demanding, and insisted that she didn't need the police to help. I reassured her that it was the best course of action to inform the police. I even offered to walk her to the station, which was about 20 minutes back down the hill. But this is where the story gets a bit weird, and also rather terrifying. The girl turned and ran back into the graveyard. She ran directly through the gates, into the eerie blackness. She never turned back. She just ran as quickly as possible until she had completely disappeared. The night was then totally silent. While the situation itself wasn't fun to begin with, I was now spooked beyond belief, now standing in a darkened street, completely alone. I had a lot of questions running through my mind. Who was the girl? Why was she there alone? Why was she scared of the police? How was she not frightened of the dark? And who was she running to, or from? I turned and ran all the way back down the hill, not stopping until I had reached a well-lit, built-up area. Safe to say that after that night, I didn't run on my own again. This is a mystery that's rattled around my brain for years now. I find myself thinking about that little girl on the regular. But one thing I've never been able to figure out is what she could have needed help with, or if she ever even needed help in the first place. This is my first post here, but lately, I can't stop replaying this experience in my head. It's been years, but the story feels as vivid now as when it happened. Maybe telling all this will help me move on, or at least make peace with it. I met Leo when I was 17, during my junior year of high school. He was 18 at the time, a senior, and a recent immigrant from Guatemala. Leo was new to our school and he didn't talk much, but he caught my attention. We had several classes together, but the one place we truly connected was in choir. There was something about his quiet demeanor and the way he carried himself that intrigued me. He seemed mysterious, and I guess that's what drew me in. One day, after a choir trip, I decided that I was going to make the first move. On the bus ride back, I worked up the courage to sit next to him. My heart was pounding as I struck up a conversation, but within minutes, we were speaking like old friends. Leo was charming, funny, and he had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world. We talked for 3 straight hours, and by the end of the bus ride, I was smitten. Before we got off the bus, he handed me this little origami boat with his phone number and Snapchat written on it. It was such a sweet and unexpected gesture. I fell hard. Over the next 10 days, Leo and I became inseparable, or at least it felt that way. We messaged and snapped each other constantly, sat together in every class we shared, and even started eating lunch in the library together, just the two of us. I was on cloud 9, completely swept up in the excitement of this new connection. But even in those early days, little things started to feel off. The first red flag was his refusal to hang out outside of school. I invited him to everything: group outings, casual hangouts, even family dinners, but every time, his answer was a flat, emotionless nope. No explanation, no hesitation, just no. At first, I thought maybe he was shy or nervous, but as the pattern continued, it only felt more and more odd. The second red flag was the way he handled our conversations. He'd ask me questions, seemingly normal ones actually, but then interrupt me the moment that I started to answer. "What are you doing today?" he'd ask, and as I began to speak, he'd cut me off with something more intrusive, like, "How many boyfriends have you had?" It was jarring, like he was trying to control the flow of conversation, always steering it into deeply personal territory. I brushed it off, telling myself I was overthinking, but deep down, that was my clue that something wasn't right. On the 10th day, things completely changed. I was out walking my dog when I got a strange message from Leo. He said that he had a dream about me, and he wanted to tell me about it. At first, I was curious, even a little excited, but as the messages started flooding in, my stomach dropped. Leo described a series of graphic, sexual fantasies about me in excruciating detail. His words made my skin crawl. He objectified my body in ways that felt dehumanizing, not to mention terrifying. Then he started talking about the types of nude photos he wanted to take of me, outlining disturbing scenarios where I'd be alone, vulnerable, and under his control. His fantasies weren't just inappropriate, they were predatory. And it wasn't sexy, it was horrifying. As if that weren't enough, he proposed that we start meeting in secret several times a week, ensuring that no one would ever know. And for me, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I managed to respond with a firm no, and please never talk to me again, before blocking him on everything. After this, I was a bit shaken, so I called a close friend who also had Leo on Snapchat. When I got on the phone with her, her voice was frantic when she told me that Leo had started posting pictures to his story. Pornographic photos of girls who looked eerily similar to me. They had the same body shape, hair color, and skin tone. He kept posting these photos for nearly 2 months straight, all the while continuing to approach me at school, acting as though nothing had happened. Every time he tried to talk to me, I shut him down, telling him to leave me alone. But Leo never gave up. Eventually, he graduated and announced to the class that he was heading to California. I thought that'd be the end of it. I thought I was safe, but I thought wrong. That summer, the messages started up again, this time from random numbers. "You look pretty in that pink shirt," one said. Another one read, "What did you order? I got the burger." Sometimes the messages were even more specific though. "It's a nice day for the fair, isn't it?" It seemed like every time I went out with friends, he was there. I never saw him, but the messages made it clear that he was watching me. At the same time though, his Instagram was filled with photos of his new life in California. Pictures of beaches, a new house, even a job. But none of these photos included his face. I began to wonder if he was even in California at all. Desperate to escape, I deleted all my social media and changed my phone number. My family decided to move to a new town after I graduated, and I followed them, hoping to leave Leo behind for good. And for a while, it seemed to work. But that's when the emails started. He created fake profiles to stalk my friends and family, sending cryptic messages and trying to find out where I was. This went on for more than 3 years. Then one day, it just stopped. No more messages, no more fake profiles, nothing. I don't know why he gave up. Maybe he finally moved on. Maybe he found someone else to target. I don't know, and honestly, I don't want to. I've since built a life for myself. I got my social media back, but keep everything private now. I'm married to a wonderful man and killing it in my career. But no matter how much time passes, I don't think I'll ever forget the fear, the paranoia, and that constant sense of being hunted. Every few years, these memories resurface, playing like this broken record in my mind. Even now as I tell this, I feel that same dread that I felt back then. I hope sharing my story here will finally help me let go. But a part of me knows that I'll carry this with me forever. It seems like the kind of thing that one just can't forget. This happened back when I was in the 7th grade, around 12 years old. At the time, it was just my mom, my little brother, and me living in a rental house in a rundown low-income area. The neighborhood wasn't exactly friendly, but when we moved in that summer, our next-door neighbors came by to introduce themselves. It wasn't completely unusual for the area, though not something I'd really expect. For the record, this was in Oregon. My mom worked a full-time job, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., which meant my brother and I took the bus home from school every day. Occasionally, our cousin would come home with us, and her parents would pick her up later. That little routine felt comfortable for us. One afternoon, I came home and noticed that the small family laptop we owned was missing from the countertop. I thought maybe my mom had moved it. When she got home, we quickly realized that it wasn't just the laptop that was gone. My iPod was missing, a wallet was gone, and even my mom's safe, which had a handgun and some family valuables in it, had disappeared. Someone had very clearly broken into our home. We called the police, and when they got there, they investigated the house. They concluded that the intruder had likely entered through the doggy door that led into the garage, then used the unlocked garage door to access the house. It was terrifying to think that someone had been inside while we weren't there. The cops said they'd keep an eye on the house, and even stayed parked outside overnight. My brother and I were so scared from this invasion that we slept in my mom's room. The next day, we made sure every door and window was locked before leaving. It was a Wednesday, and my school had this random half day, so I got home around noon. This was another day where my cousin came home with me, while my brother went to a friend's house to hang out for the afternoon. Using the spare key that my mom kept under the doormat, my cousin and I let ourselves in, and for the next hour or two, we just hung out until her mom came to pick her up. After my cousin left, I was lounging in the living room playing Snake on my Nokia phone when I heard something. It was the slow creak of a door opening. I sat up on the couch, and from where I was sitting, I could see the entryway to our home. The sound was coming from the closet right next to the front door. My heart started racing as I watched the closet door swing open, and out stepped our next door neighbor. He was skinny, almost frail looking, and he had this unhealthy, gaunt appearance with sunken-in cheeks and these intense, darting eyes. He looked way older than he actually was. I would have guessed 40 at a glance, but I'd later learned that he was only 26. He was shaking so hard that his body almost seemed to vibrate, and his movements were jittery, like someone who hadn't slept in days. For a moment, we just stared at each other, both equally surprised. I think he assumed that everyone had left when my cousin did. That's when his initial shock began to fade. This was replaced by something far more terrifying. A smirk. He started walking towards me, his eyes fixed and unblinking. I was too terrified to move. When he was close enough, he grabbed my shoulders hard, with bony fingers digging into my skin. That's when he leaned in with hot breath and said, "You're pretty." I instantly tried to recoil, but he only pulled me closer. As a 12-year-old, I thought he was going to lick me. But as an adult, I think he was about to do something much worse. In that split second, adrenaline kicked in. I let my body go limp, dropping my full weight to the floor. That's when his grip loosened just enough for me to slip out of his hands, as I fell onto my butt. As he bent down to grab me again, I kicked up with everything I had, aiming right between his legs. My heel connected, and he let out this loud, pained yell before doubling over and cupping himself. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I scrambled to my feet and made my way to the front door as fast as I could. I ran to a friend's house about 6 doors down. The friend's mom was home, and as I pounded on the door, gasping and crying, she immediately let me in, called the police and my mom. When the cops arrived at our house, the neighbor was gone. He managed to steal a few more small items before fleeing, but I gave the officers a full description of him and told them who he was. That same day, he was caught at a local pawn shop trying to sell some of our stolen belongings. It turned out he was a meth addict, desperate for money to fuel his habit. The drugs had left him physically weak. That's probably the only reason I was able to escape. He later admitted that he'd been high during the attack, which gives you an idea of just how out of his mind he was when he tried to grab me. The investigation from the cops revealed even more disturbing details. Over the course of several months, he'd been watching our house, learning our schedules. At some point, he'd taken the spare key from under the doormat to make a copy and put the original back without us noticing. The police were shocked at the level of planning, given how dim-witted he seemed in many other ways. I testified against him in court, recounting every detail of the attack. He was already on parole for drug charges, so the physical assault and robbery added up to a long sentence. Several decades, if I remember correctly. After that night, I just couldn't put that fear to bed. I slept in my mom's room for the next year, jumping at every little sound I heard. It took a long time for me to feel safe again, and even now, I'm much more cautious than I ever was before. Looking back, I'm just grateful I had the presence of mind to act the way that I did. Sometimes, instincts are all you have to rely on. Hey guys, if you're into the content that we create, we've got a Patreon where you can support the show and get early access to new episodes before everyone else. Just head on over to patreon.com/Malevolent Mischief or check the link in the description and join our community today. When I was a preteen, I got into bird watching. It wasn't really official by any means. I was just some kid that liked to sneak up on birds, take pictures, and then look them up in books. I decided to start this hobby by making a list with pictures that I had printed from the library of all the native birds in my region. Every weekend, I'd wander around the neighborhood, which was suburbs smashed against large plots of land covered in brush, all in search of new birds. With a few ponds and a large creek in the area, I found quite a few within my first few weeks. But there was one bird I had set as sort of my white whale due to its rarity, and that was the black vulture. We have tons of turkey vultures in my area. They're the most common, but many fewer black vultures. It's difficult to tell the difference between the two if they're flying too high. The best way to determine which vulture it is has to do with how much gray and white there is on their wings. If they got closer, you'd eventually be able to make out the red head of the turkey vulture, as I often did, disappointingly. Unfortunately, I can't remember the exact date or what month this took place in, but one weekend, I decided to spend the next 2 days searching high and low for the elusive black vulture. I went climbing over the small wire fencing around a nearby brushy area as per usual. All the keep out signs be damned, just to start my search. Usually, you had the best luck finding scavenger birds on roadkill, and there happened to be a small 2-lane winding road that mirrored the creek nearby, just through the brush. So I cut across the sort of mini forest and headed in that direction. As much as it made me sad to see a dead deer or a possum, it was a common sight on this road, as both sides were open, with trees and undergrowth almost choking it. There are some parts of the road that almost became sort of a tunnel, due to the interlocking leaves above. It was incredibly easy for a deer or some other animal to jump out in front of a car, with neither party realizing until it was too late. Initially, I didn't have much luck. There were a few crows on the smear of a squirrel, and I even saw a few ducks swimming in the creek beside me, but nothing big. It started getting late, and despite the dangers of walking down a forest road in the looming darkness, I was determined to stay out as long as possible. I decided that I'd reach a small park area at the end of the road, and then I'd start to make my way back. I went under a small tunnel of leaves and came out on the other side. I was delighted to see the familiar shape of a large bird in the sky. It was just the right shape and size to be a vulture, but I had no hope of checking for the grayness of its feathers, as the sunlight was now limited. Instead, I was stuck following it as it slowly began to sink lower. After about 10 minutes or so, it eventually landed, and I carefully snuck forward, doing my best to avoid anything that could alert the bird of my presence. I sunk low to the ground, realizing that the bird had landed in a small clearing at the far end of a park. It was just a small open field, slightly tilted down a hill, with the parking lot up on top. I had been there before, as it was a fun spot for kids to roll down the hill due to how steep it was. I approached it from the bottom, excitement brimming when I heard several squawks and shrieks of other birds. Black vultures are much more aggressive than turkeys, and I was hoping to catch a spat. I got to the edge of the clearing and pulled out my binoculars. Two things kind of hit me at once here. One, I found it odd that they were in the middle of a park rather than closer to the road, where you'd assume they'd find roadkill, though I reasoned that things could die anywhere, even in the middle of the park. But secondly, it smelled awful. The scent was rather light, but I've been known to have a really sensitive nose. It was this sharp, coppery scent, like when you pull rotten ground meat out of a bag. I'd smelled roadkill before, and in the heat of the day, it smelled bad, but it was nothing like this. When I put my binoculars to my eyes, I expected a deer corpse and birds fighting over it. I never in a million years thought I'd see a corpse of a completely different kind. The birds were there, and I remember the faint pang of excitement that I still had, recognizing the proud head of a black vulture before the image of it sitting on the chest of a naked woman sucked the life right out of me. I was frozen, yet I couldn't look away. My throat tightened as I nearly puked at the sight. The birds had done surprisingly little to her body. She had what I think were cuts, but most of her was intact. What wasn't intact? The birds were at. Her eyes, lips, and her privates were red and shredded. If there was a big defining wound, I missed it, between the gathering of birds and the fading light, but what I did see, I don't think I can ever forget. I certainly haven't forgotten. I can pull up the image so clearly now, even after all this time. She was pale, almost blue in places, with blonde, crinkled hair. I sat there stupidly for who knows how long as the sun sank behind the trees. This was a time where cell phones weren't exactly common for a child to have, and I had quite the hike back home. I realized now I was in shock, and I could only move when the sudden fear that whoever did this could still be nearby hit me. I forced myself to slowly waddle backwards into the trees, not taking my eyes off the body. I didn't want to turn around for some reason. I was so scared that someone would be behind me, and I thought that if I just backed up forever, maybe nothing would happen. That strategy lasted for quite a while, until I felt like I was far enough away from the scene that I turned and booked it the entire way back home. I crashed through at least a mile of brush, and while I was smart enough to have boots and thick jeans on, my arms were bare and bleeding by the time I stopped. I paused midway through the brush by my house, realizing that, embarrassingly, I had pissed myself out of fear at some point, before nearly crawling my way through people's yards to get home. The horror didn't exactly end there, though, as I was home alone until past midnight, as my mom worked late at a diner nearby. It's stupid, and I regret it to this day, but no, I didn't call the police instantly, nor did I call my mom. I was afraid that if I did, my mom would get mad at me. I would never be allowed to go outside again, or worse, that she wouldn't believe me for some reason. I locked all the doors, double-checked, took a quick shower, and locked myself in my room. I had fallen asleep by the time my mom came home that night. I confronted her in the morning at least, but by that time, when we made the call to the police together, the body had already been found. They took my statement. We never got any calls back. I stopped birdwatching shortly after. I tried my best to find an article or news somewhere about this, but I failed in finding anything. It probably doesn't help that I can't remember the exact date. I personally have a lot of missing time from the ages of 11 to 14 for some reason, which I can't even begin to explain. There are very few things in life that I remember so well, but this is a big one. I've never shared this story with anyone outside of my own family, but I thought that it might fit here, and I apologize if not. It was sort of therapeutic, I think, telling this story after so long. I'm going to keep trying to find something to verify this, and I'll update ASAP if I find anything. To help you picture the scene, I'm going to give you an idea of what I look like at the time of this incident, 6 years ago. I'm a woman, 26 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, with medium-length bleach blonde hair. I was curvy, at about 160 pounds, wearing black high-waisted tights and a pink crop top. It's a small detail, but it feels important. It's how I remember myself that night. It was late, and I was walking home alone from a friend's house. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes every small sound you hear stand out. I lived in a rough part of the city back then, so I was no stranger to sketchy situations. Honestly, I think I'd grown overconfident, invincible even, because nothing truly bad had ever happened to me before. I always did my best to stay alert, scanning my surroundings and keeping my wits about me. I thought that that would be enough. When about halfway home, maybe 10 minutes from my apartment, I noticed a van driving slowly behind me. This, in and of itself, wasn't unusual. In my city, it was depressingly common for men to roll up and proposition women walking alone, regardless of what they were wearing. I was desensitized to it, and my default reaction was annoyance, not fear. I crossed the street, putting myself next to traffic heading in the opposite direction. This was my go-to move, and it usually worked. The van disappeared briefly, turning down a side street. I kept walking, figuring that was the end of it, but a minute later, it reappeared, pulling up right beside me again. I glanced over and saw two men in the front seats. They looked similar to each other, maybe brothers, perhaps even twins. Both had dark complexions, dark eyes, and short-cropped hair. Their expressions were hard to read, but something about the way they watched me made me feel icky. Still, I wasn't scared yet. Annoyed, yes. This seemed to be just another unpleasant interruption in a long line of them. I decided to be firm. "I'm not interested," I said sharply, my voice steady. Then I crossed the street again, thinking surely that would be enough to deter them. But it wasn't. They kept circling back around, pulling up each time I switched sides. It was as if they were toying with me, testing just how far they could push. That was when I started to feel that first flicker of fear. My annoyance gave way to unease. I dealt with plenty of creepy encounters before, but this one felt different. They weren't just pestering me. They were persistent and deliberate. When they zipped past me one final time, I snapped, yelling after them to fuck off. I hoped the outburst would send a clear message, and for a few minutes it seemed like it had worked. The van disappeared and I let myself relax just a little bit. Still, I wasn't taking chances. I pulled out my phone and unlocked it, getting ready to call my sister, who I lived with at the time. That's when I heard it, this low rumble behind me growing louder. It was the van. It pulled up to the curb so quickly that it made my heart jump. Before I could even process what was happening, the passenger door flew open and one of the men jumped out. He was moving fast, and even though light was dim, I could see the emotionless look on his face. The back door of the van swung open behind him, and in that moment, I knew exactly what was about to happen. He was going to grab me, and they were going to take me. The traffic on the street was inconsistent, and there were no other cars in sight. I realized then that this is what they'd been waiting for, a moment when there were no other cars around, no other person around. Not to sound cliche, but time seemed to slow down as the man approached me. When he was about 3 strides away from me, he lifted his arm in an attempt to grab me. My mind raced, searched for something, anything that might stop him. And out of sheer desperation, I acted. I tilted my phone towards him, holding it up like I was recording. "You're being filmed," I said in a voice calm but loud enough to carry. "My friends in the chat have your license plate number, and the police have already been notified." The lie spilled out of me so naturally that it almost felt real. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away, but I kept my face as steady as I could. I even tilted the phone a little more, as if to give my imaginary audience a better view of him. The man turned to stone for a second. His expression twisted into something between doubt and anger. I could tell he was weighing his options, trying to decide if I was bluffing. I held my breath, praying that he wouldn't call me on it. When finally, he turned and ran back towards the van, slamming the door behind him. The driver hit the gas, and they sped off so fast that the tires screeched against the pavement. I stood there, absolutely rooted into the sidewalk, watching taillights disappear down the street. My hands were shaking, my phone still clutched tightly in my grip. I didn't call anyone right away. I didn't even move. I just stood there trying to process what had just happened. I could tell the adrenaline was wearing off because I was hit by a wave of nausea and this deep, bone-deep exhaustion. When I finally forced myself to keep walking, I was hyper-aware of every shadow, every sound, and the short distance to my apartment felt like miles. That night, I lay awake for hours, replaying the encounter in my head. The what ifs were the most terrible part. What if I hadn't thought to use my phone? What if he'd called my bluff? What if there hadn't been enough time for me to act at all? I'd always prided myself on being alert and prepared, but that night shattered any illusion of control that I thought I had. In the days and weeks that followed, I noticed a shift. I no longer felt safe walking alone, even in broad daylight. The confidence that I'd once had was gone, replaced by a constant undercurrent of anxiety. I started taking different routes home, avoiding certain streets, and always looking behind me. 6 years later, I still think about that night. It didn't define me, but it changed me in ways that I can't ignore. I take my safety much more seriously now, and I'm far more cautious about the risks that I take. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that no amount of confidence or vigilance can actually make you invincible. Sometimes, the only thing standing between you and danger is a split-second decision. That, and a little bit of luck. I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving out to the Midwest. My friend Amy and I, both females, would spend many days exploring the remote corners of New Mexico, discovering abandoned ghost towns and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. One afternoon back in March of 2010, we were traveling from Ruidoso to Albuquerque. Always up for exploring, we took a back road rather than traveling the more direct highway. One leg of our journey had us on NM 55. It's a remote, teeny tiny 2-lane highway. We love those type of roads. Up until that day. This part of New Mexico is flat and lonely desert. You can see for miles, and there's virtually nothing except dirt and rocks between towns. And the towns themselves can be miles apart. So we're on NM 55 going north. After a few minutes, we see this white pickup truck ahead of us, going the same direction, when suddenly, he stopped his truck sideways in the middle of the highway, blocking most of both lanes. We were about a mile away from him, and as we got closer, we began to feel a bit uneasy. We could see no reason for him to do this. We were the only other vehicle out there, and we began wondering if we should turn around rather than come up to him and have to stop. We were now about half a mile away from him, when he pulled over to the opposite side of the highway, with his truck still pointed in the direction we were headed. We tried to relax a little. Surely this guy was a rancher or something. Maybe he was just checking something on his land. As we passed him, we noticed a few things off the bat. 1, there was only a single person in the truck, a middle-aged guy who never took his eyes off of us. And 2, it looked like he was speaking into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he pulled back onto the highway and began following us. But he never got too close. He would get to within a few car lengths, then drop back a little, then speed back up again to within a few car lengths. We began getting nervous. We realized just how alone we really were out there. We had seen no other traffic on that road, and we hadn't told anyone about our great idea to take this detour. We checked our phones, and neither one of us had signal. Typical for remote New Mexico, but scary given our present situation. Amy was driving and speeding up, while I frantically checked the map, hoping to find a road that would have more traffic. But there was no other road. We had to travel this one to get to the next town, Mountain Air. Turning around to go back the other way didn't seem like a viable option anymore. After a few minutes, we saw another pickup truck coming towards us, and although we were a distance off, it seemed like he was going very, very slowly, maybe 20 miles per hour if that. This pickup was old and beat up, whereas the one behind us was much newer. Amy had us up to nearly 80 miles per hour, which wasn't exactly typical on these 55 mile per hour highways, and we blew by the old pickup. As we passed it, we saw that it was another middle-aged guy, and he too was talking into a walkie-talkie. After the white pickup passed him, he pulled a U-turn and pulled in behind it. As we watched all this, we could see the white pickup truck guy talking into his walkie-talkie in the rear view. No doubt, these two knew each other, and we were being deliberately followed. For the first and only time in my life, I felt hunted. They stayed right behind us. We watched for obstacles in the road. We truly thought old beat-up pickup guy had set up a trap and our vehicle was headed towards it now. We were in an SUV, so we talked about driving into the fields, but this was obviously their territory, and we were afraid of what would happen if we went off-road and got cornered, so we decided to stay on the highway. By now, white pickup truck guy was right on top of us. We could see him talking into the walkie-talkie and he stayed right on our bumper. Old beat-up pickup guy was right on top of him. The three of us sped down the highway. White pickup inched closer. His maneuvering and edging closer made it apparent that he was trying to bump us. I watched helplessly as he got to within inches of our bumper. Amy floored it, and we were now bordering on 90 miles per hour. The road was flat and deserted, but any little thing going wrong would have been catastrophic. But there was no way in hell we were going to slow down or stop if we could help it. That's when the white pickup pulled into the opposite lane and started to gain speed. The only thing we could think was that he wanted to pass us and get in front of us. If he got in front of us and his buddy was behind, then we'd be boxed in and trapped. We looked frantically at the rocky desert on both sides of the road. It seemed now that the only option presented to us was to off-road it. Should we risk it? Could we speed through the desert and make it to safety in one piece? But as we topped a small incline, we saw a sign that said, Salinas Pueblo Missions National Monument, and it pointed towards a road on the left. Right at that moment, a blue pickup truck pulled off that road and onto the highway in front of us. As we came up on it, we saw the plate said, U.S. Park Service. We looked at each other and then looked behind us, only to realize that both pickup trucks had done U-turns and were now speeding off in the other direction. We followed the blue pickup to Mountain Air and then made our way to Albuquerque as planned. I don't know what was on those guys' minds, but it wasn't anything good. There's something seriously wrong out there. I notified the state police, and they said they would keep an eye on things. For a little bit more reference, this area is very near Belen, New Mexico, which is where Tara Calico was abducted. It's also about 100 miles from Elephant Butte, New Mexico, which is where David Parker Ray had his secret torture laboratory. We didn't put all that together until later. Even though David Parker Ray had died by the time this happened to us, we do believe that there are others out there like him. And whoever abducted Tara has never been caught. There is the possibility that maybe we came into meth lab territory, but since this happened on an actual highway, rather than a backcountry road, I tend to discount the meth lab theory. Whatever's going on out there, I think it would be advisable for most to just avoid it. This story happened when I was much younger, back in my college days. It's something that stuck with me though, not just because of how horrifying it was, but because it was so close to someone I cared about. If you dig deep enough, you might actually find this in the local news. It happened in Providence, Rhode Island. At the time, I was dating a girl who went to school in Providence. It was summer, so most people were back home, scattered around and waiting for the next semester. My girlfriend's best friend, though, had stayed in Providence because she'd landed an internship. She was living in a 4-bedroom, multi-family home. While she was set to have 3 roommates for the upcoming year, they hadn't moved in yet. Something about the lease starting a couple of months before school kicked off. So, for the summer, she had the whole place to herself. One weekend, my girlfriend suggested we head down to keep her friend company. She was lonely and bored, and it seemed like a good opportunity to hang out. Providence was only about an hour away from us, so it was an easy trip. That Friday night, we drove down and spent the evening just chilling, drinking, talking, and admittedly, dabbling in a little coke. It wasn't anything wild, just the kind of carefree night you'd expect from college kids. Around 2 a.m., we decided to walk to a nearby gas station to grab some cigarettes. Nothing out of the ordinary. but on our way back, we passed this guy who gave off an unmistakably creepy vibe. He was on the opposite side of the road when we passed, but he stared at us as we walked by. It was a bit unsettling, sure, but we were on the street at 2 a.m. Her house wasn't in the best neighborhood, though far from the worst either. We brushed it off and went home, eventually passing out for the night. The next day, my girlfriend and I headed back to our town. The weekend ended. Life resumed. But later that week, my girlfriend asked if I wanted to head back down to Providence to hang out again. Unfortunately, I couldn't. I had work all weekend. She went anyway, this time without me, and her friend's boyfriend also came over to stay. From what my girlfriend later told me, it was pretty much a repeat of the previous weekend. They spent the night drinking and even went out to party for a bit. Sometime around 2 a.m., they made it back to the friend's place. When they entered the mudroom, which, for those unfamiliar, is a small enclosed entryway just before the main door. The mudroom door had been left unlocked, something they probably didn't think twice about, but someone else had. As they stepped inside, a man was standing in the corner of the mudroom. He was waiting for them. Ragged-looking, jittery, and clearly unwell. He stared at them, and then with a voice that was sharp and commanding, he told them, "Get in the fucking house." At first, it seemed like everyone was too shocked to process what was happening. That's when they noticed the gun in his hand. He repeated himself, but louder this time. "Get in the fucking house." My girlfriend's friend had already unlocked the door to the house, and it was partially open. Everyone stood paralyzed, and that's when the friend's boyfriend, trying to defuse the situation, stepped forward with his hands slightly raised. He said, "It's all good, man. Just calm down." But what happened next was instant. The man raised the gun and shot him. Just like that. The boyfriend crumpled to the ground, screaming in pain. My girlfriend and her friend didn't wait to see what the attacker would do next. They smashed into the house, slamming the door behind them, heading for the furthest bedroom from the front door and hiding underneath the bed. Terrified and with tears streaming silently down their faces, they huddled there, waiting. They didn't know the man had run off after the shot. They were convinced that he'd followed them inside. While they were hiding, they could hear the boyfriend outside screaming for help. What was likely the most heartbreaking part was that in between his pleas for help, they heard him clear as day say that he was dying. The neighbors, hearing the gunshot and the cries, called the police. Officers arrived quickly, but by the time they got there, the assailant was gone. My girlfriend and her friend stayed under the bed, too afraid to come out until the police were in the house. In the hours after they finally emerged, they found out the horrifying truth. The man had been watching my girlfriend's friend's house for weeks. He had been the same guy we saw staring at us the weekend before. He'd been casing the joint, learning routines, and waiting for the right moment. The police launched an immediate search, and later that day, they found him at a local homeless encampment. He was clearly on drugs, and he even had the murder weapon still with him. They took him into custody right around the same time that the boyfriend succumbed to his injuries. That fact hit my girlfriend hard. She told me about the guilt that she and her friend felt, how they couldn't stop replaying the night in their minds, wondering if there was something they could have done differently. Whether they could or couldn't have, I firmly believe that they did what they needed to survive. Update. A user messaged me with some info, and they even added a comment with it. I'm going to share it in this post. Again, this story happened about 15 years ago, and I can't find anything on Google search. But with this information and the time frame, maybe some internet sleuths out there can dig something up. Yes, I remember when that happened. I believe it's right off of Broadway, on Cortlandt Street, right by the gas station. My friends had just moved into an apartment around the corner, and if I'm not mistaken, my current coworker lives in this very house with her boyfriend. They got a little bit of a deal on it, but didn't realize why until after they moved in. Apparently, there's still a blood stain on the wood floor in the mudroom. Thinking back to this summer makes my stomach turn. I wasn't there that second weekend, but knowing how close I was to the situation and that I had seen the guy just a week before keeps it firmly etched in my memory. Some moments in life are so senseless and brutal that they never really leave you. It makes my hair stand on end thinking about this guy. He saw me shopping for school supplies and things for my new apartment one evening during my first week of grad school and decided that I was his mark. I had just moved to my new college town, didn't even have a cell phone yet after leaving the ones my folks paid for behind. I was grown and I could take care of myself. I realized later I might have been a nitwit for that. As I left the parking lot with my purchases, I noticed this truck pull up behind me at the exit. It was late and there weren't too many people out. I pulled out and so did he. It was a few miles down a long retail street with lots of stoplights before my turn. As I drove, I realized the guy in the truck was trying to get my attention. Thinking he might have just been trying to get my number and I was in a relationship, I ignored him. Over the next few miles, he kept trying to get me to look at him. Some red lights he would end up ahead of me, some behind or even beside me. But at every light, he positioned himself so he could stare right at me, either directly or through one of his mirrors. His gaze felt unwavering, and I felt it trained right on me, and this is actually what made my initial anxiety rise. He was driving oddly, speeding up close to my bumper, hitting his brakes when he was in front of me, swerving close to my car a couple of times. When finally at a red light, where he was beside me, I glanced over and absolutely started to panic when I was met with an unbelievably empty, emotionless stare. It was then that I realized he was fondling himself. He was likely getting off on the fact that he knew I was terrified. His following me and his trying to force me to pull over wasn't making this any better. At one point, I scooted through an intersection on a hard yellow a couple of cars ahead of him, thinking I could shake him. Nope. He went around the cars at the light, ran the red, and got back in front of me. A freeway entrance ramp came up, and I tried to fake him out by putting on my signal and getting into the merge lane for it. He took the bait and started up the ramp. As he got ahead of me, I quickly got out of the merge lane and continued straight. Again, I'd hoped that I'd lose him, but he drove his truck down the embankment just to keep following. At another light, where he was beside me, I pulled through the light and then turned at the last possible second. He made a U-turn and ran another red just to keep following me. My panic really ramped up at that point. With no cell phone, no sense of direction, and in a new city, I really didn't know what to do. So I turned on classic rock and forced myself to sing along. Kept my car at the speed limit so I wouldn't crash out of sheer terrified stupidity. I decided to drive to the supermarket across town because I remembered it had a police station in it. He followed me all the way there. He burned out of the lot as soon as he saw all the cop cruisers parked out front. I filed a report and asked for a police escort home. I insisted on this because something told me this creep was waiting for me to leave the police station. And he was. As soon as I pulled out, I saw him. I pulled over and told the officer following me, and he went after him, but the truck had taken off and the cop couldn't catch up. The police got the surveillance video from the first store. It turned out this jerk had been dogging me the entire time I was shopping. I saw him on surveillance footage following me through the store. I saw him follow me out, close enough that he could have grabbed my elbow if he wanted to. I saw footage of him circling the lot in his truck waiting for me to pull out when I took too long to unload my cart. I was able to remember 6 of the 7 digits of his plate, as well as the make and model of his truck. In the end, the cops did nothing. They said it was a he said, she said, since the surveillance video didn't catch him doing anything particularly unlawful, and it was likely a losing case to try and charge him with anything. I ended up trading vehicles with a friend for a couple of months to try to feel safer and went about my life. I had no idea what this disgusting piece of did just a handful of months later, until almost 15 years had passed. I was watching a Discovery ID show about the kidnapping and murder of Sandy Jeffers. I almost fell out of my seat when I saw the mugshot of her killer, Aaron Lee Skeen. It was him. I was so disgusted that law enforcement did nothing in my case that I tracked down the investigator in the murder case, and after verifying some things about his vehicle that were changed in the TV reenactment to weed out people making crap up, she took my contact info and official statement. She could neither confirm nor deny that my run-in was with Skeen, but qualified her statement by saying, "At least you won't have to worry about him anymore, because he got life without parole." I only wish something could have been done when he terrorized me. Perhaps that would have been that, and things might have ended up differently for Sandy. About 10 years ago, I was living in a major US city while attending college, sharing an apartment with 2 other roommates. It was a typical student setup, cramped but manageable. One of my roommates, Christy, had a habit of bringing questionable people back to our place. Some were just odd. Others were straight up sketchy. During the fall semester, she befriended a guy from her advertising class who called himself Dallas. He became her weed dealer, and before long, he was a regular in our apartment. I always had this gut feeling that there was something off about him. But Christy seemed to like him. She denied they were sleeping together, but the way she hung around him made me a bit skeptical. It was a strange dynamic, but that's not any of my business. My other roommate and I found him charismatic enough, though neither of us understood what Christy saw in him. I remember one evening in particular. We had him over for dinner. He talked endlessly about himself, telling the story of his entire life, really. According to him, he played for our college's football team. He was incredibly successful at dealing, and he had just started his own legitimate business at the impressive age of 23. It was obvious that this guy wanted to impress us, but honestly, he was 5'4", maybe 150 pounds soaking wet. Something about the way he carried himself, almost like he was the biggest deal in the room, just didn't sit right with me. We all nodded along, humoring him, but my roommate and I both sensed that he was full of shit. Christy, though, she lapped it all up. He came over a few more times after that, but things didn't get strange until one random Tuesday afternoon. That day, my other roommate went to buy weed from Dallas at his off-campus apartment. When she arrived, she walked into something that I'm sure she wasn't expecting. She saw Christy, passed out and nearly completely unresponsive, sitting in a lazy boy chair in the corner of Dallas's living room. This was the middle of the day. Dallas never mentioned that Christy was there, and he acted as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But my roommate freaked. She shook Christy awake, and by the time she came to, still groggy and disoriented, she told my roommate to fuck off and just went back to sleep. When my roommate told me about it later, we both agreed that that was weird as hell. It confirmed what we already had suspected. Dallas wasn't a safe person to be around. A few months later, Christy eventually stopped hanging out with him. She told us that he had gotten pissed off because she didn't want to sleep with him. That was when we learned another shocking piece of information. Apparently, Dallas had been engaged to another woman the whole time. And in case you didn't know, his real name wasn't even Dallas, because of course it wasn't. At that point, I was just glad that we were done with him. But 2 years later, his name, the one that he had lied about, would come back around. By then, neither my roommate nor I were in contact with Christy. We had moved on, living in a different part of the city, focused on our own lives. But one night, I got an alert on my phone. A newly transferred student from our college had gone missing after leaving a campus bar the night before. The story was everywhere, on the news and in social media. A few days later, the worst was confirmed. That missing girl had been murdered. The day that news broke, my phone rang, and it was my old roommate. She didn't even say hello. "Dude, do you remember what Dallas's real name was?" I paused for a second. Yeah, I think so. And then it hit me. Go online and read this article, she said. He fucking killed that girl. I immediately searched his name and there it was. His mugshot. That same self-important, cocky asshole I had once shared a dinner table with, now staring blankly into a booking photo. Next to his mugshot was a photo of the girl that he had killed. I felt sick, and the more that I read, the worse it got. Apparently, he had taken the girl home that night, probably expecting a one-night stand. But at some point, something went wrong. Blunt force trauma and strangulation. Now that was awful enough, but what he did next took it to a whole different level. He cleaned up his apartment, sort of. Not well enough to erase the evidence completely, but enough to delay things. Then he put her lifeless body into a storage container and took a lift to his grandmother's house. Once there, he buried the container somewhere on her property. I remember just staring at my screen trying to process it all. I don't know if this was premeditated, but it certainly wasn't impulsive. This was methodical. He had planned out how to dispose of her. He had calmly called a lift, carrying her body into the back seat. I'm sure he had smiled at the driver, made small talk like it was nothing. After the police obtained security footage of the two of them leaving the bar together, the pieces of this puzzle all fell neatly together. They arrested him almost immediately. But what's even more shaking is that after this news came out, so many women came forward with their own creepy stories about him. Girls who had felt uncomfortable around him, gotten bad vibes. Girls who had nearly gone home with him, but changed their minds just before getting into the car. It turned out everything he had told us was a lie. He never played football at our college. He never owned a successful business. He wasn't even a real student at our school anymore. He had just been hanging around, lying about his age, in order to prey on younger women. And we had let him into our home. We had shared meals with him. Christy had even trusted him. Looking back, I can't help but wonder how close we had come to something even worse. If his temper could turn deadly, how many times had we been in danger without even realizing it? That poor girl, she had no idea who she was dealing with. None of us did. I've left a link to a news story down below if you're interested in reading about this creep specifically. When I was about 12 years old, my family and I moved into an old apartment complex, one that had been standing for over 50 years at that point. Some residents had lived there their entire lives, watching generations come and go. This place had its own quirks, but one rule stood out to me even as a kid: a strict no pets policy. The landlord wasn't vague about it either. He outright told us that too many pets had gone missing around the area. Their solution? Ban pets altogether. That way, essentially, none of the occupants would have anything to worry about. At the time, I didn't think much of it as a kid. I was quiet, and I mostly kept to myself. My older brothers, though, they were the opposite. They made friends with just about every kid in the complex and the surrounding neighborhood. Every day after school, they'd beg my mom for change so they could visit the Candy Lady, a local woman who ran a makeshift convenience store out of her apartment. Apparently, she would buy snacks in bulk: gummies, chips, cookies, all the stuff that kids loved, and resell them to the neighborhood children. I had never been to her place, but I was curious. Every time I asked my brothers to tag along, they'd refuse. So one day, I took matters into my own hands. I stole $1 from my mom's purse. I know, bad. And then I followed my brothers and their friends, determined to find out where the Candy Lady lived. I kept my distance, watching from a corner until they went inside. They were in there for a while, so I decided that I'd just go the next day. When the next afternoon came around, I took my stolen $1 and headed to her apartment alone. When she answered the door, I was met with the sight of an older Caucasian woman with a warm smile. She had this welcoming presence about her, the kind that made you immediately lower your guard. She invited me in, asked for my name, and when I gave it to her, I asked for hers in return. "Just call me the Candy Lady," she said. She made conversation easily, asking me about school, if I lived nearby, if I had friends. When I told her that I mostly kept to myself, she looked at me with sympathy. "Oh, honey, kids don't usually come here alone. Where are your friends?" she asked. I explained to her that friends weren't something that I had a lot of, and that I preferred observing rather than participating. Something about that seemed to resonate with her. She told me to take whatever I wanted, free of charge, gesturing toward the entire array of snacks. My little kid self, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed as much as I could carry. As a kid, this was a dream come true. Free candy, free chips, and best of all, I thought I had made a friend. On my way out, she smiled and said, "You can come back anytime you'd like." I felt giddy. When I got home, I hid my snacks in my drawers, returned my mother's stolen $1, and went to bed feeling like I had discovered something special. But when I went back, things had changed up. About 3 or 4 days after my first visit, I went to the Candy Lady's apartment again. This time when she opened the door, she seemed frantic. That warm demeanor that she had greeted me with originally, replaced by something nervous and twitchy. This made me hesitate and told her that I could come back later. But the moment she realized that it was me, her face relaxed a bit. No, come in. No worries," she insisted. I stepped inside expecting another free-for-all candy grab. But this time, she had a different idea. She asked me if I came back for more snacks, and I nodded excitedly. But then she shook her head. "The freebies last time, that was a one-time thing. If you want more, you're gonna have to help me out first." She explained that she had some chores that needed doing, and I didn't mind. Chores were a normal thing for me. She handed me a garbage bag and told me to take this to the dumpster, but not the dumpster in the courtyard of our apartment complex. The dumpsters next door. Once I was done with this, I could come back and pick whatever snacks I wanted. It was simple enough. I assumed that maybe she was too old to take out her own trash and figured I was doing her a favor. But even then, it stood out as odd that she insisted I use the neighboring dumpsters. Although I was far too focused on the reward to question anything. This became our routine. Every afternoon, I'd finish my homework, head to her apartment, take out her trash, and collect my payment in snacks. It was easy work. But I think part of me knew that it really wasn't as easy as it was being made out to be. A month into this arrangement, I was on my way to the dumpsters when I noticed that this bag wasn't tied properly. Before tossing it, I figured I should tie it up securely, that way nothing would spill out. And that's when I smelled it. Something metallic, rotten. The scent itself made my stomach turn, but I was curious, and I poked my little head into that bag just a little. That's when I saw it. Wadded up paper towels, soaked in what looked like blood. Clumps of hair. Small, plastic-wrapped bundles sitting at the top of the bag. My entire body froze. It didn't take a genius to realize that something was horribly wrong here. I dropped the bag in the parking lot and ran home as fast as I could. I remember bursting through the door sobbing, and I told my mom everything. That I had been visiting the Candy Lady, the arrangement we had, the trash, the blood, the hair. She didn't seem as freaked out as I expected. Instead, she sighed and said she'd go check for herself. But minutes later, she came back to the apartment and looked annoyed. All she told me was that when she got down there, the Candy Lady was already throwing the trash away. Then she brushed the whole thing off. Before telling me in a no-nonsense manner, "I don't want you wandering so far anymore. Stop doing favors for strangers." And that was that. But she had ignored everything I told her. I tried my best to push it out of my mind, and somehow I did. I don't know if forgot is the right word. More like ignored. Until the day that my brothers ran home and burst through the door the same way that I had done. "The candy lady got arrested," they yelled. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, although my mom barely reacted, telling my brothers to mind their business. As children, that was the last we ever said about the candy lady. But a few weeks ago, probably about 10 years after all of this happened, I was having dinner with my mom. We started reminiscing about that old apartment complex, laughing about how run down and ancient it was. And then I asked her, "Do you remember what I told you I found in the candy lady's trash?" At first, she didn't. Then I brought up that my brothers had said she had been arrested, and I watched her face go just a little pale. It seemed then that the memory had come back. Turns out, my mother had asked the landlord about it at the time, and he had told her the truth. That the candy lady had been killing and skinning animals that she had found nearby. She was the reason that pets kept disappearing. And apparently she was also the reason that no pets were allowed in that building. I, a dumb little kid, had been helping her get rid of the evidence. I shuttled dozens of trash bags full of skinned animals out to the dumpsters. And the only reason that she was ever caught? The neighboring apartment complex complained about the smell coming from their dumpsters. That's how they found out. That's how they caught her. And that's how I realized that I had been helping to clean up for a monster. I don't know whatever came of that woman. Obviously, I never ran into her again. But learning of what it was that she was doing, what I was doing on her behalf, is kind of all I can think about now that the dots have been connected for me. I've always loved animals. I could never see myself ever doing any harm to anything living and breathing. So it's tough to comprehend others that clearly don't have that same mentality. The law doesn't look at the killing of animals the same way that it does the killing of people. So it's likely that this woman has been out free for years now, perhaps still doing the same thing. I don't know why. I don't want to know why. But I keep my animals locked safely in the house just because of people like her. In the fall of 1974, my grandma was 30 years old, juggling 4 jobs to support my dad. Life was a constant grind, but she had a strong work ethic and took pride in every shift that she took. One of her jobs was as a hostess at a high-end steakhouse called the Moonraker, a restaurant known for its upscale clientele and a steady stream of regulars. The place attracted all kinds: businessmen, socialites, politicians, even the occasional celebrity. But for my grandmother, one man in particular stood out. He was new in town, and every Thursday night, without fail, this handsome, well-dressed man would arrive, charming as ever. He never just walked in. He'd always call ahead, making sure that his preferred table and waiter was available. The same table and waiter every week. The table itself had a perfect view of the front doors, but it was close to the back exit. This man was polite, never flirtatious, never rude. His voice was warm, confident, disarming. He'd always greet my grandmother by name, asking how she was doing, making small talk before she led him to his table. For months, this routine never changed. But one Thursday, he didn't show up. The next Thursday, no show. He was gone. No call, no reservation, no explanation. Just gone. At first, my grandmother thought maybe he had left town. Maybe he got bored of the place. This steakhouse was in Utah after all. Life went on. But what she didn't know was that while she had been greeting this charming stranger every week, he had been hunting women in the same city. And because of this, one of her coworkers would never come back. It wasn't until months later when this man's face was all over the news. The one who smiled at my grandmother every Thursday night. The one who knew her by name. The one who seemed to watch the door like a hawk. The one that disappeared without a trace. His name was Ted Bundy. By then, the entire world knew his name. And now, so did my grandmother. At first, she said that it didn't feel real. She had met plenty of men like him, smooth talkers, businessmen, regulars who knew how to play the part of the perfect gentleman. But the more she thought about it, the more uneasy details began to resurface. How he never missed a Thursday. How he preferred the non-smoking section, as if he couldn't stand the haze clouding his view of the entrance. How he'd always order many bottles of hard liquor from the bar, drinking just enough to loosen up, but never enough that he would lose control. And how every single week, she'd watch his light tan Volkswagen Beetle roll into the parking lot. The same parking lot where, just a stone's throw away, Carol DeRanch was abducted. A young woman who had just barely managed to escape Bundy's clutches after he had posed as a police officer in order to lure her into his car. Then there was my grandmother's coworker, the girl who went missing that fall. At first, it seemed like just another tragedy, a young woman vanishing into the night, the kind of news that you wish you could ignore. But then they found her deceased near the Salt Lake City airport, murdered. And just like that, my grandmother realized she had been brushing shoulders with the predator all along. She'd later admit to me that she was grateful that she wasn't his type. She said that she wasn't some little cute thing back then. And if she had been, who knows what would have happened. I think it still stuck with her that she had unknowingly been part of his routine. Bundy didn't just walk in and eat. He'd study the room. He knew exactly where to sit, near the exit with a perfect line of sight of the front doors. He blended in perfectly, never raising suspicion. And when he'd leave, he'd walk out into the night, into the very city that she called home, and he'd start his hunt. He had spent months smiling at her, shaking her hand and making casual conversation, all while carrying the darkest secret imaginable. He wasn't just a regular. He was a serial killer, sitting comfortably in her restaurant every Thursday, doing an amazing job at hiding in plain sight. I was 25 years old when this happened, and looking back, I still can't fully believe that it went down the way that it did. For context, I used to smoke weed regularly, mostly for fun, but also to help with my insomnia. The only problem? It made me paranoid. Not in some cute, oh no, the FBI is listening sort of way, but in a full-blown, someone's hiding in my house kind of way. I tried switching to vaping my THC because it was easier and it gave a better high. But the paranoia? It only got worse. I convinced myself I was being watched, to the point where I strategically hid knives around my apartment, in case I needed to defend myself from these hypothetical intruders. I knew I was being ridiculous, but I couldn't stop. Instead of putting the knives back where they belonged, I just bought more. 4 extra ones for the kitchen, plus a huge butcher's knife with an orange rubber cover. And for some reason, when I got home, I felt compelled to put that one into my purse. It just stayed there. After a while, it blended in with all the random junk that I carried. Receipts, gum wrappers, tampons. I stopped questioning it. I figured I'd never need it anyway, right? Till one night. It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished my shift at work. I went outside, took a few quick vape pulls, popped in some eye drops, and got ready to head home. But before I could leave, my manager told me that my coworker had bailed on cleanup, so I was tasked with staying and locking up. Now, I wasn't about to argue. I was a little too high for that. So I just grumbled my way through it and stayed way later than I wanted to. By the time that I finally got out, it was late. I wasn't as high anymore, but I also wasn't completely sober. And instead of getting a ride, I made the terrible decision to walk home. In my head, my apartment wasn't far, maybe a 10-15 minute walk, but the streets were empty. And the further that I got from work, the quieter that it became. I'm now a few blocks away from my job, and I notice a man dressed in dark clothes step around the corner ahead of me. He was wearing a big jacket and a ball cap. Strange, considering that it wasn't that cold. At first, that's all I thought of it. But as I kept walking, he slowed his pace to the point that he was now behind me. And then he crossed the street to my side. That's when my paranoia kicked in full force. I couldn't shake that feeling that something was off here. My skin was tingling, and every instinct in my body screamed that this wasn't normal. So I did what any anxious person would do. I crossed the street to the other side, but he followed. All right, the red flags were now confirmed. I felt my stomach drop, and giving the last benefit of a doubt that I could muster, I wanted to test it again. So I crossed the street one more time, and so did he. At that moment, my brain all but short-circuited. I knew that this guy wasn't just some guy walking home. He was following me. I was now hyper-aware of everything around me. There were no other people, no witnesses, no help. Just me and this creep on an empty street. I got this feeling that I wasn't going to be able to outrun him. I'm not exactly an athlete, and he was way too close for comfort now. And out of nowhere, that's when a thought hit me. You're not unarmed. I remembered the knife at the bottom of my purse. With my bag slung in front of me, I did my best to discreetly rummage inside of it until my fingers wrapped around the handle. A huge wave of relief washed over me as I pulled it out and removed that orange cover. The blade even glinted at me under the streetlights. When I turned back around, he was now way closer to me. I froze, facing him, and for a moment, we both just stood there, staring at each other. I couldn't see his expression. His cap had cast a shadow over his face, but I knew that he saw the knife. It was clear that he hadn't expected this. Something about that realization sent a jolt of energy through my body. I felt confident, strong. The knife in my hand was a power shift, and I felt it. And then I took a step forward. He shifted uncomfortably, stepping back, and that tiny movement triggered something predatory in my ancient lizard brain. Charge him, is what my brain said. And I don't know where the instinct came from, but suddenly, I was running full bore right at him. He panicked. He nearly tripped over himself trying to turn around, and I had covered some good ground. So as he bolted, I swung the knife that I hadn't even realized that I reared back with, downward, catching the fabric of his coat. It snagged for just a second, and he must have felt it because the next thing I knew, he was full on sprinting for his life. And me? I chased him. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was adrenaline. Maybe it was pure rage, but something about seeing him run, him being scared of me, flipped a switch in my head. I wanted him to feel hunted. He was fast, so there was no way of me catching him. But when he looked over his shoulder to see just how far away I was, he stumbled. And that moment was glorious. I don't know if he rolled his ankle or just panicked, but suddenly, his run became a limp. I must have actually laughed, because he looked back, eyes wide with terror. No longer was I the helpless girl walking home. I was the thing that he was afraid of, and I loved it. Until a single rational thought broke through the haze. What are you going to do if you catch him? And that thought hit me like a brick. I immediately stopped. The moment I did, my entire body started to shake. The adrenaline drained out of me all at once, and what replaced it was panic. What the fuck had I just done? Had I really just chased a man down with a knife? Did I try to stab him? My heart hammered in my chest as I watched him disappear around the corner. That limp of a run fading off into the darkness. And then, like the coward I really was, I turned and ran the other way. I sprinted home, locking the door behind me like that would somehow erase what had just happened. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, hands trembling violently as I tried to drink some water, but half of it ended up on my face, and I think I cried a little bit. Sitting there replaying everything in my head, reality sank in. I was lucky that I hadn't gotten hurt, arrested, or even worse. I knew without a doubt that now was my time to stop vaping. Time to stop with weed altogether. While that paranoia may have saved my life, I think it also made me reckless, an easy target. Walking home late at night and high was a stupid decision, and I was done making those. I flushed my vape juice down the toilet. I pulled the knife out of my purse and placed it on the counter. I considered even throwing it away, but after it had been so useful that night, that would have seemed like a rather unceremonious way to go. So I held on to it. It's actually tucked away in one of my purses to this day. Sometimes I like to think that maybe, just maybe, that creep that had a weird motive for following me still has nightmares about when I turn the tables on him. On April 30th, 2019, I was staying at the Crossroads Hotel in Kansas City, Missouri. I was there for 2 weeks for work, but with nothing to do over the weekend and no friends in town. So at around 9 p.m., I decided to have a drink at the bar by myself. I had just ordered my first beer, and I have to emphasize ordered here. I hadn't received the drink. Therefore, I wasn't drunk, and my mental state was still 100% clear. That's when a girl tugged on my shirt. She was supremely attractive, and I was single at the time, so I turned to say hello. She whispered in my ear that the man next to me was being really creepy, and if I would help her out and pretend to be her boyfriend. She even offered to buy me my next drink. I'll be honest, I thought this was just a line, but I obliged because, frankly, she was a smoke show. But there really was an old man, late 50s, maybe early 60s, rocking back and forth in his chair next to her. Eyes half open, clearly 2 sheets to the wind. The kicker to his look was this man was dressed in a full tuxedo. I asked him about the tux, and he said that his daughter just got married that day. The wedding party had a room block at the hotel, and he was keeping the post-reception tab open at the bar. At this point, he started blatantly hitting on the girl. Let's call her Rachel, saying how beautiful she was and how lucky I was to have such a beautiful girlfriend while staring at her. I really felt for this poor girl, and all women honestly, in that very moment. Then Rachel wrapped her arms around my waist and said, "Yep, this is my boyfriend. I love him to death. I'd kill for this guy." The guy rocked back and forth in his chair once more and then goes, No, I get it. I've killed for love before." Rachel and I looked at each other. I thought I had misheard him. I'm sorry, what did you say?" I said, "I've killed for love before." For the next 10 minutes, this man proceeded to tell us about this supposed murder that he had committed. It was his ex-wife's boyfriend. From what I could tell, he was divorced, most likely reluctantly. His wife remarried, and he got jealous of the guy. He told us how he killed him. A Glock 37, shot 3 times. Twice in the chest, once in the head. In addition to what he did with the body. Wrapped in black plastic bags, went fishing in the lake behind his house one morning, and threw it overboard with weights tied to the legs. I could tell that he was suspicious of us asking so many questions, and that's when I figured that it was time to leave. Then, and I was proud of this, I actually got his name. I said, "It was nice to meet you, Mr." And he filled in the blank. The next morning, I asked the front desk manager, who I'd become friends with over years of traveling there, if there was someone staying at the hotel with that name. She said she couldn't give me a room number due to security reasons, but confirmed that someone was staying there with that name. I called the Kansas City Police Department tip hotline and told them everything I knew. I have a tipster ID number and everything. I check maybe once a month or so to see if there's been any arrests, but so far, no dice. I really thought this guy was messing with me, but the more that I thought about it, the more I thought maybe not. I could totally see someone having this weigh on their hearts, feeling vulnerable at their daughter's wedding, being just drunk enough to feel untouchable, and trying to get this off their chest. His one mistake was that I was sober at the time, and I remembered every word that he said. I know this is a long shot, but strangers of the internet, if you know of any unsolved murders that fit this description, make sure to send me a direct message. This story took place back in 2003, when I was the spry young age of 8. It was a Saturday, so I was home from school and I had dedicated my entire day to playing Spyro, Year of the Dragon on my PlayStation. My dad normally worked on weekends, and my mom was on a Monday to Friday schedule, so she took the opportunity to grab groceries during her days off. Both mom and dad always made a big point of never leaving me alone for very long, maybe an hour tops before I was a bit older. This particular day, mom had asked me if I wanted to join her on her weekly shopping run, which I was usually incentivized to do so I could sneak some candy bars into the cart. But on that day, I was really vibing with Spyro. I asked her nicely if I could please stay so I could finish my game, and without much protest, she agreed, as long as I did my chores. That sounded like a deal to me, so I happily accepted, and she was on her way. Well, no more than 10 minutes after she had left, I heard our front door open and shut. My initial thought was that maybe mom had forgotten her sunglasses or something, so I stayed in my room a bit longer since I was mid-game anyways. About 60 seconds later, I heard cupboards opening and shutting, and I noticed that the footsteps seemed a bit heavier than my mom's. At this point, I figured that dad had come home from work unexpectedly, so I paused my game and went into the kitchen to see what was happening. When I came around the corner, I froze completely. Before me stood this gigantic, strange man that I had never seen before. He was pouring himself some coffee out of our pot that was still heated from a couple hours prior. My memory may not be serving me correctly, but I remember thinking that he was the largest man that I'd ever seen. I'd estimate that he was around 6'5" and must have weighed a solid 280 pounds. Within moments, he noticed my presence. "Oh, hey little man," I remember him saying in a strangely calm demeanor. "I'm just grabbing a little coffee before I head back to work." He must have been in his 50s or so, and had this long, gray beard-mustache combo to boot. He also wore one of those throw-over yellow safety vests that construction workers wear on the job. Every fiber of my being wanted to nope the fuck out of there, but his tone was almost too calming to do so. He seemed genuinely nice, despite being a complete stranger that I knew for a fact was not supposed to be in our home. I managed enough courage to ask him what he was doing here. He responded by saying he was a friend of my dad's and was just popping in for a quick sec. In retrospect, I should have questioned him further, but I was already pretty disturbed by the randomness of it all, so I just said okay and returned to my room where I promptly locked the door behind me. A few minutes passed while he presumably finished his coffee. After that, he knocked on my door and left me with, "I'm headed out for now, sport. Tell your dad I said thanks for the coffee, and I'll see him Monday." He then left through the front door again, and I watched him walk down the street and out of sight from my bedroom window. About a half an hour later, my mom returned from the store, and I was quick to tell her about what had happened. As you can imagine, she was completely and utterly freaked out by the entire ordeal. She made 2 calls, first to my dad's workplace to talk to him, and then to the police. For what it's worth, my dad is an engineer and worked in a relatively small tool and die shop, so I don't think any of his coworkers would have been wearing construction vests. After relaying my description of the man to my dad, he confirmed that there was no way in hell that this was any of his coworkers. And that's what led my mom to calling the police promptly after that. I gave a short statement to a police officer that showed up to the house in order to try to identify the man, but we never received any updates after that. My mom swears that she locked the door that morning, like she always does. So either she misremembered that, or the guy somehow unlocked it on his own without using any sort of brute force. We ended up investing in a pretty high-end home security system for extra assurance after that. And thanks to that guy, I never got out of going to the store with my mom again. This following story took place in 2015 or maybe 2016, and to avoid any confusion, I'm a woman. I was living with someone at the time who worked an opposite schedule as me. He worked graveyard, and I worked during the day. So when I was getting up and getting ready for work, he was just coming back home. On the nights during the week, I obviously would be at home by myself. So one night during the week, I was feeling especially lonely, and my favorite toy unfortunately broke and died. So I decided to drive downtown to the 24-hour adult store to buy another one. The town that I live in is a mid-sized suburban town filled with mostly residential areas. The main downtown was essentially one small patch on the way to the freeway. My apartment was maybe 10 minutes away. I pulled into the parking lot behind the adult store. The parking lot itself was dark and had multiple driveways entering it. Most of these entrances either led to the bars or restaurants downtown, as well as the store that I was heading to. After I parked my car, I walked towards the entrance of the store, which was on the street. And to do so, I had to walk towards the driveway that I came in to park. Upon walking to the entrance, I noticed a man standing by himself smoking a cigarette. It was late, maybe 1 a.m., and it's not the most settling thing to see a single person standing by themselves. Though I figured maybe he was one of the patrons from one of the bars on the block taking a cigarette break. As I walked past him, he said hi, to which I responded with a quiet hi back, but I didn't make eye contact with the man. Once past him though, I had a better look at his appearance. He had a shaved head, wore a long white t-shirt with shorts hanging past his knee. He had a pair on sneakers, accompanied with some tube socks that covered his shins. While this look was by no means unusual to see in my town, I was more concerned that he was sitting by himself, and that he instantly took an interest in me as I walked past him. While continuing on my path to the store, I saw out of the corner of my eye that the man proceeded to follow behind me. When I say follow, I don't mean he coincidentally was walking behind me. He immediately followed right behind me as soon as I passed him, making a point to maintain the same walking speed. I didn't know this man's intentions, but a guy by himself that late at night felt like a recipe for trouble. As I looked down the dark and empty street, I weighed out my options of where to go. Initially I thought, keep walking so he doesn't know you're going to the adult store. But since it was 1 a.m. and there was no one else on the street, I thought that to be more dangerous. Then I thought, just go in one of the bars. But then I figured that would give him an easier introduction to approach me. So I realized my best bet was to continue into the store like I had planned, where I knew that it was well lit and that people could see me. I proceeded to the shop for what I came for. The man entered the store behind me but hung out at the front of the shop so as not to look like he was following me around. But he wasn't even pretending to shop. He literally just sat at the front waiting. As I was shopping, I heard the man make psst sounds, to which I ignored. He wasn't getting the message. He continued to make those sounds as I continued to shop while ignoring him. Eventually, I walked up to the cashier, who was completely oblivious to what was going on. I tried to whisper to him, "Do you know that man? Or does he work here?" But the cashier asked me to repeat what I was saying. I asked again, still spoken in a quiet voice. Not understanding my attempt to be discreet, the cashier responded with, "I can't hear you. Speak up." At this point, I felt my cover was blown. So in a more normal tone, I told the cashier that the man in front followed me from outside and won't leave me alone. I explained that my car was in the lot behind the store, and I didn't feel comfortable going to my car alone. The cashier said okay. Now, the cashier's area was an enclosed square-shaped counter to maintain distance between the staff and the customers. The cashier walked to the front by where the man was, and from behind the counter, told him to leave. He then came back and assured me that the man would go away, though that man did not in fact go away. He continued to stand there, and given that I didn't want him to follow me directly to my car, I stayed in the store and pretended like I was still shopping, even though I had already found what I came for. I would occasionally glance to the front to see if the man was still there, and he was. I kept going back to the cashier explaining that the man hadn't left. That's when the cashier walked back up to the front, and I heard him say, "Enough already, man. Leave the store." While he was doing this, I went to the far back end of the store to remain out of sight. By the time I circled back to the cashier, I noticed the guy was no longer in the store. The cashier told me that he repeatedly and more assertively told the man to leave. He said the man claimed that he didn't understand English. The cashier then said that he pulled the baton that he kept under the counter for protection, held it over his head, and asked the man, "Do you understand this?" To which the man finally left the store. I made my purchase, but was still worried about walking to my car, even though I was parked in one of the first spaces of the parking lot. The cashier pointed to a small TV behind him that had 4 angles of CCTV footage. He assured me that the man was gone, and if I saw him, to come back into the store. He also said that he would watch me walk to the car. Even though I would have felt more comfortable with him walking me personally to the car, I understood that he was by himself, and he couldn't exactly leave the store unattended. After making my purchase, I speed walked to the car. I always have my keys at the ready, so as I got near my car, I hit unlock on the remote, got in, placed my bag of purchases on the passenger seat, and proceeded to start the car. Once my car was on, I took off the e-brake, put it in reverse, and while putting on my seatbelt, I looked in my side view mirror to back out safely. It was at this point that I saw that same man in that mirror, full-on speed walking right to my driver's side door. I was driving a Honda Accord at the time, and that model automatically locks all the doors when you take the car out of park. And as soon as I saw him approaching, I hit the gas and violently pulled out of my parking space. I must have pulled out so fast that it startled him and stopped him nearly dead in his tracks. He was now standing right next to my driver's side door, so I got a good look at his face as I pulled out. I gave him the most serious dead stare I could because I know most predators play off the fear of their victims. And my stare must have worked, because as soon as he saw me staring into his soul, he turned his head back to the driveway entrance and proceeded to walk back to where he was standing. He had a look of defeat on his face. My face, however, was overcome with relief. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove myself back home as quickly as I could. I felt a little bit of shame being by myself and going out so late, so I did tell my roommate about the incident when he came home at 6 a.m. He also concurred that me going out that late by myself wasn't the smartest thing to do. While I no longer live with that person, I still live in the same town, though I never leave my home for anything past 9 o'clock anymore. While the town I live in isn't the most dangerous, there are still enough crimes that occur here that it's also not considered the safest. So to the man who decided to follow me at 1 in the morning, with what I can only assume were sinister intentions, let us not meet. So I grew up in the Republic of Ireland in a small town. The typical town where everyone knew each other, super friendly, perceived to be safe. I think you get the picture. My town is near the border to Northern Ireland, which is important to the story later. For anyone unfamiliar regarding the history of Ireland, the North is still under British rule and classified as the UK. My neighbor Michelle and I were friends, and we loved going to our local community center to swim. This one Sunday, when I was about 8 years old, Michelle was 9, we were allowed to walk there and back by ourselves. It was no more than a 10-minute straight walk in a populated area with cars and people. Anyway, we got there no problem. We had a great time swimming, and then we had the idiotic idea to walk further down into the town before we took ourselves home. This again was a near enough straight shot, about an extra 5 minutes walk. We got into town fine. We bought ourselves Mr. Freeze ice pops, and we strolled around the tiny town center. I remember Michelle suggesting that we go to the pet store, and that was going to be a bit of a mission. But Michelle knew of a shortcut. The shortcut was behind the building works of a brand new shopping center being built in the town center. So on we walked to the building site, when out of nowhere, this grown man approached us carrying what I can only now in my adult head describe as vaginal speculums. Honest to God, that's exactly how I remember them. One in each hand, and he said, "Girls, come here, come here. Do you know what these are?" He had a full-on Northern Irish accent. It definitely wasn't local to our town. And that, in addition to what he was holding, immediately scared me. I recall Michelle and I both saying no and stepping backwards to get away back towards the main street. But he continued to move towards us. When suddenly, this small two-door blue car drove towards us with two women in the car. The man, seeing this car, fled. The ladies pulled up right in front of us, stopped the car and said, "Girls, is that man hassling you?" I don't think we even had a chance to speak before they say, "Hop into the car, girls. We'll get you home." I, of course, being the idiot I am, went to get in. Thank God for Michelle, though. She said, "No, we're fine. Our moms are right around the corner." The women said, "Okay, as long as you're sure." And then they took off just as swiftly. I started crying to Michelle, basically saying, "Why did you do that? What if he comes after us on our walk home?" But I'll never forget her saying, "Are you stupid? Those women had Northern Irish accents too." This is a story that I come back to every so often, and I always wonder what would have happened had we gotten in that car. Were they all in it together? Were we going to be trafficked through Northern Ireland? Were they just nice women? But if that's the case, how would they have even seen our interaction? These are the thoughts that never cease to creep me out, and they mess with my head even almost 20 years later. I worked for a packaging company at the central office, along with the owner's oldest daughters who helped run the company. I had worked there over a year and really loved my job. Really nice people to work for. But things changed when a temp that we'll call C went in for his interview. I would assist my manager with interviews by sitting in and taking notes. When C walked in the interview room, my manager shook his hand and greeted him. And as he was greeting her back, he kept his stare on me, which I found a bit odd. We said a quick hello and the interview started. C got the job, was shown around the office, and would be starting the very next day. The following day started off like always, busy, but in a good way. Nothing too hectic. Nothing that I couldn't handle. C comes in the office, and I, along with a coworker, show him the inventory that he'll help care for. We introduce him to the rest of the crew and people that he'll be working with. We showed him the computer system, gave him instructions on how to do what he needed to. Everything went well. He's polite, gets straight to work, and my coworker and I go back to our areas. I even felt like kind of a jerk for feeling the way that I did before when I met him. At the end of the day, heading to my car, I see C standing by it. I ask him if he needed something. He tells me that he wants to apologize for the day before, for the staring, that he didn't mean to seem rude. I tell him it's fine, no harm, no foul. He asked if he could make it up to me by taking me out to lunch tomorrow. I tell him that although I appreciate the offer, he didn't have to make up anything to me. Plus, since I was always busy at work, I normally ate at my desk, which wasn't true, but it seemed to work. A couple of weeks later, my coworker H, who I'm also good friends with, asked me what's going on between C and I. I'm confused as to what she's referring to, and she tells me that C was telling some of the workers in his crew that we always flirt with each other, and that there's a lot of chemistry between us. He can even see us becoming serious. I'm now really confused and a bit freaked since I don't see how he could mistake me just giving him the inventory list as flirting. He's not a bad-looking guy at all, but he just didn't give me a vibe that I was attracted to. That same day, he becomes aware that I now know what he is saying. That day, I had to leave early since I was going to watch my young niece who was sick while my sister went to work. I'm already stressed about my niece, so I decided to deal with him the next day. But about 2 hours after I get home, and I'm alone with my 5-year-old niece, I hear the doorbell, and when I peek out the window, I see that it's C. I tell my niece to go lock herself in the bedroom and hide, just in case. I open the front door, but I leave the security door still locked, and I promptly flip out on the guy. I asked, What made him think it was okay to show up to my house unannounced? He started telling me he wanted to explain himself. As he's starting to tell me this BS story, I ask him how he even knew my address. He then gets quiet and really serious and tells me he was on his way home when he passed by my house and he recognized my car. I call out his BS directly because my sister took my car since hers has a booster seat, and since I helped organize his employee file, I know that he didn't live near me at all. I tell him he needs to leave before I start getting more angry. That's when he starts raising his voice, tells me that I'm hurting his feelings because I can't see how much he likes me, and how stupid I would be to not see what a great catch he is. As he's insisting to talk to me, my brother-in-law pulls up in the driveway. Now, brother-in-law is a big guy. Although he's a teddy bear at heart, he can be very intimidating. C turns and catches a glimpse of brother-in-law, and you should have seen the color drain from C's face. Brother-in-law picked up on the vibe that I wanted C out of there, and he tells him to scram. I don't think I've ever seen a person physically skedaddle the way that C did. I call my manager and tell her what just happened. She tells me not to worry. She'll tell the temp agency that C is no longer allowed at work. I didn't see him anywhere after that day. But 2 days later at work, I get called into my manager's office. Apparently, she had a weird feeling when I called her and decided to review the security cameras. Turns out, the day that C was interviewed, he stayed parked outside the premises, and the only time his car moved was after I left for the day, a full 6 hours later. That explains how he knew which vehicle was mine, and just putting 2 and 2 together, he most likely followed me home that day. That's really the only explanation for how he knew where I lived. When I was a young 20-something, I worked in a sports bar/restaurant. We had an awesome lunch special, and it would attract the same customers on the regular. My first meeting of an older man who introduced himself as Michael wasn't a great deal strange, but it was noteworthy since before he cashed out, he tried to set me up with his son, who he had mentioned was a lawyer. I was young and had a boyfriend at the time, so I just brushed it off, thought that I'd never see the guy again. But fast forward many months, and Michael is now a frequent regular, coming in nearly every one of my 4 to 5 lunch shifts a week. If I wasn't working, he'd happen to come in and ask for my section, only to turn around and leave once he learned that I wasn't on the clock. It was odd, but I didn't think much of it. Over the many months and numerous lunches he spent dining in my section, he'd ask a ton of questions. I probably shared too much information looking back, but this was pretty normal since I had a ton of regulars and often spent time chatting away with them. Michael seemed harmless enough, but there were times where his questions would probe just a little too far. He wanted to know about my boyfriend, my home life, things like that. I'd usually skirt around these topics by feigning like I had something to tend to. It didn't start to really get strange until the following holiday season came about, and he began bringing me gifts every time he came in. Some of these gifts were particularly pricey. I'd always refuse them since they made me uncomfortable. In one instance, he brought me a Prada purse. This was back around 2000, maybe 2001, when Prada was huge. I laughed and said, "Oh gosh, I can't take this. My mom would kill me if I brought this home." Not sure why I said it this way. I don't think my mom even would have known what Prada was, but it's all I could think to say. He then followed with, "Well then, I'll just have to kill your mom." I chuckled nervously. I left the purse on the table and tried to avoid him as much as possible until he left. Didn't quite know what to make of the whole exchange, but it left me feeling uneasy. Holidays came and went, Michael continuing to frequent the restaurant. Since the gifting season, I had really cut down my conversation with him and kept away from his table as much as I could each time he visited. There were many small but significant things that came up in those visits, which, to be honest, I can't quite remember fully since it's been so many years. But in one instance, he wrote me a 4-page letter about how he wished I was his daughter. In another, he came to me with tears in his eyes to ask if I could come to his knee surgery. One time he mentioned having a wife, and this was the first I'd heard of her. I was a bit excited, because this meant that he was potentially not as strange as I was beginning to think. Almost instinctively, I blurted out, "I'd really love to meet your wife." The next lunch day, he brings in his wife, and she's decked out in diamonds, like her ears, wrists, numerous necklaces, rings, and wearing what looks like stage makeup. It was almost like a 10-year-old playing dress-up. And mind you, this was a sports bar, and she was dressed like she was soon to perform at an opera. As they were leaving, she pulls me aside into her plume of too much perfume and whispers into my ear, "Michael just thinks the world of you." That itself was bizarre, and only seemed to further that feeling of awe. So many other strange things happened, to the point that my boyfriend at the time thought that my manager should refuse service, or at the very least, that I should be able to avoid serving Michael. I put it off until one afternoon when he came in and started the conversation. Wow, that was quite an accident. Now for most, I'm sure that would sound random, but I went completely numb. There had been a collision in front of my house that morning. I lived nowhere near the restaurant, and knew that if this is what he was talking about, it meant he had followed me at some point. He knew where I lived. When I asked him what accident he was referring to, he confirmed it was the one near my house, and that was the last lunch that I ever served him. But it wouldn't be the last of my encounters with Michael. In the following months, he would show up in random places at the same time that I would be there. He even went to my mom's work to tell her what a spectacular daughter she had. He knew of her love of painting, something that I had shared in our many conversations. He wanted her to bring some of her work over for him and his wife to purchase. She of course said no thank you. During this time, he would still come to the restaurant, although very aware that I refused to wait on his table. But he would act as if nothing had changed. My boyfriend was irate that my manager would let him into the restaurant at all. My boyfriend urged me to make a police report after getting random love letters in the mail from him. When I finally contacted the police, a youngish lady officer came to my house to take the report. I told her everything, and she looked at me and said, "You know, I had admirers too when I was your age." She said this almost dismissively, and declined to make a report, saying that there wasn't really anything to note. I bowed to authority and assumed that she was right, and left it alone. More things happened. Michael began getting obstinate, and caused a ruckus a few times when I wouldn't wait on him at the restaurant. Finally, that was enough for my manager. He told Michael that he was no longer welcome in the restaurant. Time went on, and I hadn't really seen Michael anywhere, so he was beginning to fade from my mind. But maybe 6 months pass, and one late afternoon, I see the same policewoman who had interviewed me walk into our restaurant. Soon my manager comes over and says that this officer is looking for me. It turns out she wants me to file that report after all, because it's now known that Michael isn't Michael. His name is Robert. Robert had just been arrested for stalking another young woman in our area, a waitress at a neighboring restaurant. He had gone so far as to following her home, photographing her, and superimposing her face onto nude bodies before uploading the images to the internet. I learned that Robert doesn't have a son, he doesn't have a wife, but he does have a long list of felonies and investigations against him, in addition to an apparent affinity for young waitresses. When I was much younger, I would have this recurring dream that would wake me up screaming on regular occasion. It would always start and finish the same. I'm a child and being carried by a strange-smelling woman. My little head is bobbing over her shoulder as I watch my family fade off into the distance, their faces growing more and more faint with each step she takes. A long blonde ponytail is swinging in front of my face. I feel like I'm trying to scream, but there's no sound coming out. I'm almost frozen. This dream always ends with me shutting my eyes tight just before I wake up, most of the time in tears. For years, I thought this was just some childhood fear, a fear of losing my family. but when I brought this up to my mother as a young adult, she clued me in as to why I had these dreams in the first place. Every summer, the town that I grew up in held this big street fair right in front of my grandmother's house. Her home sat on a corner, directly across from an elementary school. Next door to that was a police station, then a library, a Chinese restaurant, and a gas station that connected to Main Street. The fair stretched from her house down both sides of the main road, forming a massive T-shaped event filled with food stalls, vendors, and crowds of people. The summer that I was 2 years old, I was at the fair with my pregnant mother, my dad, my grandma, and my 4-year-old big sister. At some point, the family split up. My dad took me with him to check out a vendor selling watches, while my mom, sister, and grandma went to go get food or play games. It was a crowded afternoon at the fair, with tons of people squeezing through the streets, lots of vendors calling out to shoppers, and the quintessential scent of fried food and popcorn in the air. My dad held onto my tiny hand as he browsed through the watches, inspecting one rather closely. Once he decided to purchase it, he let go of my hand for a few moments, just so he could go pay. That's about the time that my mom walked up, and she asked my dad, "Where's the baby?" When he looked down, I was gone. He begins to look around frantically before telling my mom she was just here. That's when panic set in. My mom launched into go mode, pushing through the crowd screaming, "Help me find my baby." Strangers turned, alarmed, some stopping to help, but the fair was so packed that it's likely I could have been anywhere. When, out of the corner of her eye, my mom saw something that caught her attention. Amidst all the strangers turning to help her, there was one woman walking away from the fair. A blonde, ponytailed woman heading for Main Street. While it was her direction and her hair color that caught my mom's attention, what kept her focused on the lady was little me in her arms. I wasn't crying, not loudly anyway. Instead, I was doing the silent cry that most kids do as a baby, my little arms reaching toward my mom in distress. And that's when my mother lost it. She screamed, "That woman has my baby," and began to run after her. The crowd split apart almost like the Red Sea as people realized what was happening. But that woman didn't stop. She only quickened her pace, moving faster towards her car parked at the edge of the fair. My mom didn't stop either. She ran full speed after this woman, her heart pounding so hard that she thought her chest might explode. By the time she reached the car, the woman had already popped the door open and was attempting to place me in the back seat. But there was no way my mom was going to let that happen. Powered by pure instinct and adrenaline, she shoved that woman aside, reached into the car, and snatched me back into her arms. She screamed directly in the woman's face, "What are you doing with my baby?" The woman, clearly rattled, stammered out some excuse about how I looked lost, and she was just taking me to the police station. This only intensified my mom's rage. She pointed toward the police station 2 doors down, the one next to my grandmother's house, the one this woman would have had to run right past to get to her car. The woman didn't answer, and in that moment of silence, my mom noticed something else. This woman wasn't alone. There were 2 creepy-looking men in the front seat of this car. They reeked of booze, and they were watching what was unfolding with nervous eyes. Just as my dad and grandma were catching up to my mom, this woman hopped in the car, and they bolted off with her. Here's where this account gets a bit murky for me because I don't think I would have handled it the same way. My family never filed a police report. My mom didn't see the point. There were dozens of witnesses, and our family was well known in town. So if those people ever showed their faces again, she figured that someone would recognize them. Although the general consensus, the women in her group weren't locals. My mom believed that they were from a rough city about 2 towns over, one with high crime, and known for a lot of other illicit activities. My mom believes that had they gotten me away from that fair, that their plan was to sell me. And we'll never know for sure, but the reality is, I was about 4 seconds away from disappearing forever. It wasn't until I had this story shared with me that I realized that it wasn't a nightmare I was having while I slept. I was remembering. The blonde ponytail, the strange smell, that feeling of slipping away from my family were all very much real. This was a real moment buried in my subconscious, a fear so deep that my little mind could only begin to process it while I slept. To this day, I can still see that ponytail swaying in front of my eyes, and I know that in some twisted alternate reality, I never made it home that day. Before I begin, I just want to say I'm writing this on a throwaway account. I don't want this story connected to me. I'm close to graduating high school, and this happened very recently. I only found out about it a few days ago, and honestly, I still feel sick just thinking about it. There was this guy at my school. For this story, I'll call him John. John was one of those kids that you'd barely notice. Quiet, kept to himself, never really stood out. Although, he wasn't exactly an outcast either. I'd had a few conversations with him, even joked around a couple of times. He was actually pretty nice, not the kind of person you'd ever think twice about. On top of that, he was friends with some of my closer friends, which is how I learned the truth about John. At the start of my senior year, I'd see John around the school every so often, but not enough to make an impression. We didn't share any classes, didn't even share the same lunch period. So to me, he was just another student blending into the background. In January, though, I started noticing him more and more. Nothing weird, nothing alarming. Just the kind of thing where you realize that you've been crossing paths with someone a lot more than usual. Then came February. For the first few days of the month, John was at school like normal. And then he was gone. Not gradually, not sporadically, just gone. At first, it didn't raise any flags for me. I wasn't close to him, so I figured he transferred schools or dropped out. Maybe his family moved. That happens all the time. I didn't even ask my friends about it, because looking back, I only noticed it in hindsight, not in the moment. A few days back, I was messaging one of my closest friends, just joking around, talking about school. Somehow the conversation shifted to school shootings. I honestly can't tell you how we got on that topic. And that's when he suddenly asked me, "Hey, do you remember John?" I told him, "Yeah." And that's when he hit me with something that I never expected to hear. "Dude, do you know he was going to shoot up the school?" I laughed it off at first. It sounded like a messed up joke. I mean, people throw around horrible thoughts like that all the time, thinking that they're just being edgy. But my friend wasn't laughing. He was dead serious. And that's when he spilled the whole thing to me. Apparently, John had been planning a massacre. He had detailed plans, social media accounts dedicated to his fantasies, and most unsettling of all, he had told his closest friends what day to stay home from school. The only reason that his evil plans never happened? Someone reported him. A friend of his, a real friend, went to the authorities before it was too late. As my friend told me more and more, the horror of it all started to sink in. John wasn't just thinking about doing something terrible. He had a strategy, a timeline, even a list of people that he wanted to target. The worst part of this all, he had relatively easy access to guns. His father worked with law enforcement, so it wouldn't have been hard for him to get his hands on whatever he needed. That realization sent a wave of nausea through me. I had joked with this kid. I had shared a classroom with him a few years back. I'd stood next to him in the halls, completely unaware of what was going through his mind. To learn that he was capable of this threw my entire body into knots. After his friend had reported him, the police got involved immediately. The school administration expelled him on the spot, and that's why he vanished from the hallways so suddenly. It wasn't until after his arrest that the police started questioning everyone close to him, trying to piece together his motives, to understand how long he'd been planning this, and why. From that point on, a lot of the conversations that the police were having with him weren't made public. We still don't know how close he was to actually going through with this. What if his friend hadn't spoken up? What if the police had just brushed it off? What if I had been in school the day that he decided to carry out his plan? Before all of this, I didn't have a polarizing opinion of John. But now, thinking about his smile makes my stomach turn. That outwardly appearing normal, friendly kid that I barely gave a second thought to? The one who never seemed like the type. The one who, if his friend hadn't reported him, could have changed hundreds of lives forever. I hope I never see this kid's face again. And I also hope that wherever he is now, he never gets another chance to do what he had planned. This situation unfolded maybe a week or two ago, and it rubbed me the wrong way. I'm hoping that someone can tell me if I'm being rationally weirded out or just paranoid. I'm a 27-year-old male, and it was my day off. The weather was surprisingly tolerable for a Midwest winter, so I decided to take my dog to the dog park. The dog park belongs to the property that I rent from, and is maybe a half block away at most, so to get to it, I have to cross my building's parking lot. I leash my dog and head down the sidewalk towards the parking lot. I notice an older woman in a bright pink coat talking on the phone in front of the building ahead of me. She keeps pacing from the door to what I assume is her car, looking visibly exasperated and being very animated with her hand gestures. I assume she's a delivery driver who didn't get the correct access code to the building and was on the phone with a customer. Happens all the time in an area with mostly apartment complexes. I wasn't close enough to hear what exactly was happening, but I only have access to my building anyway, so I continued on. As I'm stepping onto the sidewalk, she notices me and shouts, "Hey," to get my attention, although it came out somewhat aggressively or even desperate. I'm unsure why she chose me out of all people, as there were a couple of closer individuals entering and exiting their cars much closer to her. But either way, I say hello. She shouts, "Can you help me?" And I accept, as I'm worried something might actually be wrong with how she's acting. She begins talking, but I'm still too far away to hear her, so my dog and I take a few steps towards her so I can. "Can you give me directions to Main Street? My phone is dead." I immediately stop in my tracks and become a little cautious, as I know she was on her phone no more than seconds ago. Trying to rationalize the situation, I tell myself that maybe her phone did die as soon as I walked up, and she wasn't able to use her GPS or contact anyone else. Regardless, I step further from her and allow my attention-hungry dog between us, just in case. In a way, I'm relieved that all she wanted was directions, so I happily help her. I describe the way she needed to go and tell her it was actually super close by and easy to find. I took extra time giving her the directions because I'm shitty at them and didn't want to get her stranded. But no matter what I said, she was extremely confused. Whenever I would point left, she would seem perplexed and point in a completely different direction. At this point, I'm getting a little impatient, but listening to her try to relay directions back to me gave me a chance to get a good look at her. She was dressed very nicely, but her hair was messy, and she was even missing the majority of her teeth. She was even a lot taller than little ol' me. I stand at a whopping 5'3" tall. I also see that she's much older than I realized. Usually the people I live amongst are closer in age to me, and I hadn't seen her around before. This wasn't enough to give me extreme pause though, as we were relatively close to the highway and see all sorts of people come through. After the third try, she finally seems to understand where she's supposed to go, and she even calms down a little. I tell her good luck and have a good one, and we both turn around to part ways, and she heads to her car. After a few steps, I notice that the leash goes taut and my dog won't budge. I glance back to see what the deal was, and I see the woman walking towards me again, only this time at a faster than normal pace as my back is turned. This really catches me off guard because she's now much closer than when she started, and she doesn't at all seem wary about my 55-pound dog. I politely and probably pretty squeakily give her a "have a good rest of your day" to remind her that our interaction is over. She casually stops moving towards me and says, "Thanks, you too," before heading to her car for the final time. I continued my journey toward the dog park, as it's a populated area, and I would have to pass her again to get back to my apartment. Plus, I had already promised my dog. Once we're at the park, I happen to look up towards the street to see Pink Coat Lady driving the complete opposite direction that I told her. And she's once again on the phone. So her phone wasn't dead after all? Did she actually not need directions then? Was she pretending to be confused in order to talk to me? The whole situation just seems odd, but I don't want to deem anybody who might be lost or confused as a creep. What do you all think? This is a story that I haven't told anyone except my family, although it's something that's been bothering me for years. When I was a child, our family home was divided into 3. One place for my uncle and his 2 children, another for my mother and me, and the third which stood empty after my great-grandfather died. It was a large, ugly house that had been targeted by burglars before. The first time was before I was born. The second time, I was 5 and slept through it. Another time, someone drunk was walking around our garden and rearranging things. Or every day at around 3 or 4 a.m., they were standing in front of our fence and looking into the windows. When I was 7 years old, things seemed to calm down a bit. Our drunk visitor, who happened to be our neighbor, went to jail, and with him, many of these types of incidents just stopped. I remember it was a big event because my family finally allowed themselves to have animals. Another neighbor down the block had gotten caught attacking other people's pets, and he either went to jail for it or moved away. So we got 3 cats and a dog from a shelter. The other neighbors became calmer too, although something about me being a kid, I still felt uncomfortable at times. I was a nervous and fearful child, and after all these stories, I still didn't like being left home alone. So there was this unspoken agreement that if my uncle or cousins were leaving the house for even a moment, they couldn't tell me, lest I'd be afraid the entire time they were gone. Unfortunately, one of my cousins, the 23-year-old at the time, came to see how I was doing one day. We chit-chatted for a little while, and then she told me that she was going to the shop. Of course, I panicked. I didn't want to go with her, but I didn't want to stay either. So I started crying. It ended with my cousin letting me go to her room and watch cartoons, which was a pretty big deal because she was the only one with so many channels on the TV. Her room was on the ground floor and had a window that faced the neighbor's garden, who had a barbecue at the time. I remember she used that window as a way to empower me. If you see anybody outside or if anything happens, shout at them through the window. Then she left, and my focus was on the cartoons. I remember I had already watched an entire episode of Dexter's Laboratory and had switched to the channel that had the Barbie movie on it when I heard some sounds. At first, I just assumed it was our pets, but the next set of sounds were more like footsteps and doors opening and shutting. Had my cousin come back from the shop? I hadn't even finished watching Barbie yet. I remember being more angry than scared at that point and deciding to be quiet, so maybe it would take her a little while before she threw me out of her room. But the noises were really annoying. Lots of footsteps, shuffling, and even some barking from our dog. At one point, the sounds were close to the room. My cousin had a door with a window back then, one of those where you can't make out any details, but you can see shadows and shapes. So when I looked at the door and I saw a figure in a gray and black outfit, nothing special, no bright colors. It was hard to tell if it was even a man or a woman. Once again, my little juvenile brain assumed it was my cousin, and I decided to stay quiet, hoping that she wouldn't come into her own room. But at this point, even I was starting to feel uncomfortable, because this person was just standing outside of the door, doing nothing. Finally, the person turned right into the kitchen, and I went back to watching cartoons. Only shortly after this, I heard our front door open and a loud, "I'm back," from my cousin. This time, I also heard the sound of plastic bags. I remember suddenly being completely and utterly terrified. But before I could do anything, my cousin went to the kitchen, and nothing happened. No screaming, no fighting. I literally sat in her room, now with the cartoon sound turned off, just listening. But it all sounded like normal unpacking of groceries. Then my cousin came into her room, and I began bawling. I ended up telling her what had happened, and she called our neighbors. Together they searched the entire house, but they found no one. Nothing looked damaged, and nothing had disappeared from our house. The rest of the family found out too. We confirmed that my uncle and my mother were at work, and my other cousin was at school. The day that it happened, we found our cat sleeping in my great-grandfather's apartment on the second floor. But our dog was nervous and spent the entire day searching around the neighbor's yard and whining. We never managed to solve it, but when I spoke with my cousin recently, she admitted that she spoke to my uncle about it a few years after the event, and together they came to the conclusion that I must have imagined something. Although I'm 100% certain that I saw a person that day. I don't know why they were in the house if they weren't trying to steal anything or do something worse. In fact, part of me is relieved that I'll never have to find out. But the mystery of who it was and why they were there is something that I don't know I'll ever forget. I go to a school in a big city that is one of the least safe cities in the US. I chose this school for nursing and definitely not for the location. I live in a row house off campus with 4 other girls. Cheaper and nicer than dorms, or so we thought. I guess you get what you pay for. We're all girls and sophomores in college. As you would guess, we go out and drink, come back home and do things we don't remember. We had just started our rent in August. 3 floors plus a basement, which was padlocked by the owners. Which is understandable. We would definitely have parties down there to avoid immediate cleanup. The house itself was great. Amazing location to the school and work. I'm a CNA who works odd hours, which might be important for later. It wasn't expensive, and it was in good condition. I had never lived with that many people before, just one roommate. So before, we definitely knew if one of us had misplaced or changed something. I started to notice that my snacks were either half gone or completely gone, and I was starting to get annoyed. But in a house with so many people, it's too much work to go figure out who ate what, so I just ignored it. Slowly, as girls do, we start making comments about someone eating our food, but passive-aggressively. You know, college girls. We all just let it go because who wants a whole house fight? I work until about 11 p.m. in the NICU, and I get home at about 11:30 on most weeknights. I started to notice pans left out or snack wrappers around. I thought it was odd because none of my roommates had done that before, but just thought, oh, they probably drank a bottle of wine, then went to bed and forgot about the cleanup. Again, my roommate started making comments. But it became a full-fledged conversation because it was getting annoying that all of our food was gone and things being left out. I knew it was one of them, but who wants to admit they ate someone else's snacks in college? Snacks are a hot commodity. We chalked it up to the girl who always smokes and eats her weight in food, even though she swore that it wasn't her. This went on for about 2 months. It got more obvious that someone was clearly taking everyone's food. At this point, I figured that it was definitely the girl that smoked a little weed. After all, I'd see her eat a whole snack pantry in a single night. Although later on, I certainly wished that it was her. One night at work, I was about to get off, but a situation happened, and I didn't end up leaving the hospital until about 12:30 a.m. I took the bus home, and before anybody says anything, I carried pepper spray, a taser, and a pocket knife, so don't you worry. I got home and was about to collapse from exhaustion. I wanted to go to bed ASAP. I walked in the front door, and the stairs are directly in front of you. You can also see down the side into the kitchen. I walked in and saw someone in the kitchen, but was way too tired to say hi, thinking that it could end up in like a 30-minute conversation about nothing. So I just went straight upstairs. When I got to the second floor, I noticed that all my roommates' doors were closed, which is a surefire indicator that they're all either in their room for the night or asleep. I got this weird feeling, just something that made it click. They were all asleep, right? I texted our house group chat asking if anyone was in the kitchen. I felt stupid for even asking. 2 responded no, and they said the other 2 had been asleep. I knew it wasn't any of my roommates down there at the moment, so I dialed 911 but didn't press call immediately. I crept into my roommate's room across the hall. Thankfully, or maybe not so thankfully, she didn't have her door locked. I whispered, telling her that I think someone was in the house, and she gave me the widest eyes ever, almost looking like she was about to cry. She didn't suspect anything like I had, but just for reference, the area that we lived in was bad. Like there was a shooting 2 houses down, only weeks earlier, committed by a home invader. She mouthed to make the call. The whole time we were dead silent, although we didn't really hear anything. I was starting to think that I was just seeing things after such a long day at work, and was regretting that I even dialed, thinking I'm gonna look like an idiot when they show up, and it turns out that I was just overtired. We explained to the dispatcher what's going on, and they said they'd send someone ASAP, and that actually does mean right away since it's a big and dangerous city. The police showed up, and I didn't even want to go downstairs, but the operator confirmed it was them, so I did. But the whole time, I could swear the operator could hear my heart beating through the phone. The police came in and looked around. I'm thinking, oh God, I must look so dumb. They ask if there are any other floors. We tell them technically the basement, but it's padlocked, so really no. They go on to check the basement just in case. And wouldn't you know, they were right to do so. A man had been living in the padlocked basement. The lock had been pulled off the hinges and just kind of propped up against the wall. We never really looked at that though, since we rarely went out back. The guy had taken a comforter that belonged to one of my roommates out of the hall closet. He had a mattress from God knows where, and his clothes. Well, he was the one moving and eating all of our stuff. He would come upstairs in the middle of the night to do so. He started to get more and more comfortable in our place. I don't know if he was drugged out and forgot to clean his tracks up, or if he just didn't really care. Me and my roommates have pretty consistent schedules during the week, probably letting him think that anytime after about midnight, he was good to come out. None of us ever slept with our individual doors locked, and that's what freaks me out the most. He had access to any one of us at any moment, and we simply had no idea. When he was getting arrested, I was the only one to go down and look. I don't know why I did, but I wish that I didn't. I took a picture of him in the process of being arrested, just to show my roommates who were too afraid to go down. This is him. So yeah, I hope that whether in my wildest dreams or in real life, that I never get the distinct pleasure of actually meeting this dude. Also, it might just be best for you to stay out of our basement.